We are now live. Sound check. Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee meeting for Thursday, December 1st, 2022. Sound check.
Good morning and welcome to the December 1st meeting of the Audit, Finance and Administration Committee. I would like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. That any presentations and reports considered at this meeting are available on the city's website and that members of the public can contact the clerk's office to acquire documents in an alternative format. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members can submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions or make comments. Please note that quorum is present. Our first order of business is appointment of the chair for 2022-2023. May I please have nominations for the position of AFNA Administration Committee Chair for 2022-23? Oh, sorry, Councillor Wang.
I'd like to nominate Cameron Crutch.
Excellent. And Councillor, are you agreeable to this?
Yes, but thanks to my nominator, I accept.
Geez, I missed that.
I said with thanks to my nominator, I accept the nomination. Thank you.
Excellent. Are there any other nominees? Seeing none, we'll have a vote on the appointment of the chair as being Councillor Crutch. And that vote carries 6-0. I'll ask Chair Crutch to please take over.
Thank you, and thanks to my colleagues very much. Now we're on to the appointment of the vice chair. Can I have a nomination from someone for vice chair of the Audit, Finance and Administration Committee? Recognize Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair Crutch. I would like to nominate Councillor Wang as vice chair, please.
Thank you. Councillor Huang, do you accept the nomination?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. I was seconder for that nomination. I recognize Councillor Alex Wilson seconds that nomination. Now we'll vote. Thank you. That vote carries 6-0. At this point, we're moving on to approving the agenda. Legislative Coordinator McCrae, are there any changes to the agenda for today's meeting?
Yeah. No. Okay. Through the chair, There is a change to the agenda. Item 11.1, development charge delimitation credit extension for 708 Rymal Road East, Hamilton, Ontario, has been moved at the request of Councillor Clark, as he is not able to be in attendance to the January 19th meeting.
Thank you very much. Do we need a mover and seconder for that? Thank you. Can I have a mover to amend the agenda? Moved by Councillor Taddison, seconded by Councillor Huang. Now we'll vote. That vote carries 6 in favor, none against. Now moving on to declarations of interest. Any members of today's committee have any disqualifying or non-disqualifying declarations of interest to declare? I'll just have a gander. I'll look at this side first, seeing no hurried hands. None over here. Okay, looks like there are no declarations of interest. Now move on to item 4 on today's agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of our previous meeting, and that previous meeting was September 22nd, 2022. We'll need someone who is there to move it, and I see Councillor Maureen Wilson has moved it, and do I have a seconder? Councillor Beattie, and now we'll vote. And hooray, it passes 6 in favor, none against. Item 5, communications. There are no communication items on the agenda today. So we'll move on to delegation requests. And 6.1, I'll read out, is Patricia Ford, the Wentworth Condominium Corporation, 128 at 860 Rymal Road East, respecting a water line leak. And this is for a future meeting, not for today's meeting. May I have a mover to accept the delegation request? I see Councillor Huang, and I see it seconded quickly by Councillor Beattie. And now we'll vote on accepting the delegation request. And that vote also passes unanimously. Now moving on to delegations on today's agenda, item 7. There are no delegations for today's agenda, but there are presentations under item 8. Before we begin, before I get into that, I just want to say that this meeting will be immediately followed by the Emergency and Community Services meeting, which is starting at about 1:30. So we'll try and wrap our business up today for AFNA as much in advance of 1:30 as we can, and if not, there's some procedural shenanigans to go through to get us to do that. So I'm hoping we never have to get to the shenanigans stage. So I want to just let everyone know that that's the timing and that's how the day is meant to go. Presentations today, we have presentation 8.1. It's a 2022 City Enrichment Fund status update, GRA 22003 citywide. And we're having the presenters here. Morgan Stahl, Director of Government Relations and Community Engagement, is here to present to the committee on 2022 City Enrichment Fund status update. Welcome, Director Stahl.
Thank you. I'm joined here by my colleague, Mimi John, as well, who is the Grants and Strategic Partnerships Coordinator. Good morning, members of council, members of the media, and the viewing public for the Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee. My name is Morgan Stahl. I'm the Director of Government Relations and Community Engagement. I'm going to provide some brief remarks, which will be followed by a presentation from Mimi, our Grants and Strategic Partnerships Coordinator, who supports and leads the City Enrichment Fund rollout and process, to provide an update of the fund and plans for the future evolution of the fund based on council direction from members of the Grants Subcommittee. I'll then join her back at the podium to field any questions from members of AFNA. I'm also joined this morning by my colleagues in the Government Relations and Community Engagement Department within the City Manager's Office, and some of our program managers who lead and support the City Enrichment Fund are on the line. We also have Monique Garwood, who provides financial leadership to the fund, who is here virtually as well. All of the reports today pertaining to the City Enrichment Fund are largely informational in nature, meaning they're being provided as an update to Council in an effort to paint a picture of the fund prior to the Grants Subcommittee meeting. The first time that the Grants Subcommittee will meet in 2023, there will have to be decisions made on funding rationale for the City Enrichment Fund. So this is an effort, staff are attempting to be proactive to ensure that you have all of the information that you need in order to make those decisions at the first Grants Subcommittee meeting. So 2023 applications, just so that everyone is aware, the submission dates have already closed, as our application phase occur usually the first week of September to the last week of November. So the 2023 applications have all been submitted already for the rationale that will come forward at the first grant subcommittee meeting. Over the last 2 years, as a result of COVID-19 and the ongoing health crisis, programming delivered by our grant recipients have been severely impacted, and the City Enrichment Fund has experienced unprecedented challenges. In both years, 2020 and 2021, a phased approach was adopted in order to assist and adapt community needs with funding, as per the approved guidelines and grant mandate. In addition, we were also faced with significant internal challenges such as staff redeployment and the need to adapt organizationally to meet these needs. Our greatest priority through all of this was ensuring applicants had access to the funds in a timely manner and were receiving ongoing support from city staff. For the viewing public and those not familiar, the City Enrichment Fund is the overall name for the city's municipal investment in a wide range of program areas that supports the city's strategic plan. The fund is comprised of 6 program areas: agriculture, arts, communities, culture and heritage, community services, environment, and sports and active lifestyles, with funding streams and categories. Applicants must consult both the general guidelines and the program-specific handbooks in order to ensure all eligibility criteria are met. As a condition of the fund, activities must take place within the City of Hamilton and must serve communities located in Hamilton. Each year, the application intake periods are open for the first week of September to the first week of November. This year, staff consulted with many organizations through the intake period to help guide and support application submission. Staff also held 11 community-based workshops during the intake period in order to provide applicants with support and guidance. In an effort to reach more applicants, staff also recorded these workshops and made them available through the city website. Our grant handbook and session presentations are also made available through the city website. We will continue to host these sessions in upcoming intake periods so that the fund moves towards standardization and we continue to streamline processes. Our ultimate goal is to reach more organizations and ensure more applicants have access to the support that they need for their program, application questions, budget, troubleshooting, and accessing our online portal. This year, for the first time, we also offered translation service as an option for applicants and made all applications available in hard copy at municipal service centers and public libraries. Again, this was a first for the fund. Last year, with a new online platform, SurveyMonkey Apply, applicants could also visit the video walkthrough posted on the City Enrichment Fund webpage at their leisure. Workshop sessions were provided virtually to answer questions on program area streams, eligibility, goals, application process, and budget. These enhancements continue to strengthen and empower community organizations in addition to providing further capacity building for our applicants. Through the use of advertising and social media, there was a greater effort in 2021 and 2022 to get the word out in order to reach more applicants and organizations, and to engage the community in workshops in addition to one-to-one meetings. During the 2022 budget process, Council approved a total budget for the City Enrichment Fund of $6,088,340. All 2022 funding recommended was contingent upon funds remaining in the program envelope. In many cases, we saw program envelopes run out, which left us unable to fund organizations despite incredibly strong applications from nonprofits and charities within the city. More broadly, the City Enrichment Fund, the total eligible request often far surpasses the allocated approved budget for the CEF on an annual basis. For example, in 2022, the City Enrichment Fund annual approved operating budget, as referenced above, was $6,088,340, but the amount of total eligible requests received was $9,205,133. On average, between 2018 and 2022, the total amount of eligible requests was $8,900,099. and $850.80, meaning the city receives application requests most years over $2 million more than the base dollars within the approved City Enrichment Fund budget. For context, in the last 5 years, the City Enrichment Fund has had one increase of $93,200 in 2019, which was equivalent to 2% overall in the overall operating budget. As part of ongoing efforts to develop and further advance the fund to benefit the community, CEF staff have been looking at ways we can build the fund, build on existing CEF processes, and increase our service delivery by assessing EDI opportunities within the fund. I'll now turn things over to Mimi to guide you through the City Enrichment Fund overview and updates, and again, I'll join her for any questions following the presentation.
Through you, Chair. Good morning, members of council, viewing public, everybody in the gallery. I am very happy to be here today to present a general overview of the fund, which is our municipal investment in our community groups across this great city. My name is Mimi John, and I'm the Grants and Strategic Partnership Coordinator in the Government Relations and Community Engagement Office of the city. I joined in this role in November 2019, right before the pandemic hit. So really was working strongly with our community groups and internal staff across the organization to navigate what was a difficult period for our community. In terms of the fund, I just want to get right into it. Some key facts. We operate on an annual funding basis. That's our budget is $6,088,340. Sorry, $6 million, so roughly $6.1 million. That is broken up into across 6 program areas. So there are different funding envelopes, and you'll see me use this word funding envelopes because each area has a specific envelope which is specific to that area. And that's in arts, agriculture, community culture and heritage, community services, environment, and sports. And this year, brand new to the fund, council had approved $150,000 for a 2-year pilot program in the digital equity sphere. So we have 7 program areas operating this year, and we had intake for that. The money for that 2-year pilot program is coming out of the City Enrichment Fund's reserve. So that's where that money's coming from. I just want to note that we get over 300 applications annually. I would say 300 to 400 applications. One thing to note is the fund, as Morgan mentioned, we have some general guidelines and we have stream-specific program area guidelines. The general guidelines are threefold, that we provide funding up to 30% of a program's overall program budget. We fund nonprofits or community associations with nonprofit goals, and that all programming must take place within the City of Hamilton. It's important to note that we fund based on the program, project, or event, and not based on the organization. On the screen, you will see a breakdown completely of the 7 program areas that we fund. And you will see in each area, there are different streams. In some, it's 1, in some, it's 7. So each area has different funding streams, which go within the fund. And each program area has a program manager. They come from their different areas across the city and are experts in their field. So they're the ones who manage in the individual program areas. I just wanted to provide you with an overall overview of within the program areas and funding streams. As you can see on the screen, there are different funding caps. So we have the 30% guideline for funding up to 30% over the overall program budget. But on top of that, within the stream, some streams have various funding caps. So it's either 30% or the funding cap per stream. And you will see 2 of our most popular streams and program areas. In arts operating and community services, there's no cap. And that's a very popular funding area, and we tend to run out of funds really quickly over there. I just want to highlight our timeline and processes. As Morgan mentioned, our intake is always the first week of September to the first week of November. So our intake opens at that time. When it closes, there's a series of internal reviews that take place by the program managers who assess the applications. We have financial reviews that take place, and then it goes to adjudication, which is our evaluators. So we have a series of teams which evaluate each of the applications and then score them accordingly, and that's where the funding rationale is applied. And then it comes to council for ratification with recommendations to the subgrants committee on those scoring amounts and funding amounts. A little bit more about our evaluation process. Each program area has a minimum of 3 evaluators it can be per program area or per stream. These evaluators score each application, and then based on the average of the 3 adjudicators score, an average is reached, and that's how the final number for scoring an application is reached. And you can see a score of what has been used before. A score of 80 and above is a very good application. 60 to 79 is a fair and good application. And below 60, we do not recommend funding. I'm very excited to highlight some new aspects that we've been able to implement. One is a full grant cycle platform. So we started it last year, SurveyMonkey Apply, which was a brand new platform which provided applicants. It's more user friendly for applicants and also internally staff, and I'll get more into that. We are able to provide that 2-year pilot program because of council approval for funds for that. We also have translation service support where we had applicants actually reach out and if they need additional support, and we're able to provide that. We also had increased marketing in terms of our intake in our municipal service centers, across our newsletters, so really getting that out there. And then really exciting, we were able to not only talk about an EDI lens, but embed that into data capturing into our intake application form this year, where applicants could go in and select on their own which aspect of EDI they would belong to. A little bit more about our grant application system, SurveyMonkey Apply, and I highlight this because this was really the feedback for this system. Before that, we were using real manual back-end processes, which took a lot of staff time, a lot of applicant time, and this was really a application to really make it more efficient, not only for applicants, but for staff, but the overall life cycle. So it's saving us time, money, making it more transparent. We have more accountability in our processes. We already had that, but we're able to make it even more. And I just wanted to read out some of the feedback we have received. SurveyMonkey Apply is a much easier system than the older system. The process felt efficient and user-friendly. It's much easier and greater transparency, and we really love the autofill feature. So that's something I'd like to highlight. That was some of the positive feedback that we've received. I also want to highlight some of the next steps that we are working on. Through council approval, we've also have been directed to incorporate a consistent adjudication process. So that's across the fund as we move towards more consistency across the fund. Our adjudication process is more of a hybrid mix where we're able to have external adjudicators, internal adjudicators. We're looking at our funding allocations, the funding rationale, and seeing how that's working across the fund. Specifically, what has been working in the past might not be working with more applications coming in right now. As you can see on the previous screen where I had talked about funding caps, whether those caps are working. And through council direction, we are in the process of reviewing where the fund is at, the funding caps, our general guidelines, and we'll be able to come back to the committee with a wholesome view of where we are right now. And this is a general breakdown of the funding envelopes I was talking about. You can see that it's completely broken down. You'll see community services is 2.1 roughly, and that actually finishes out really, really fast. So even though they seem like a lot right here, a lot of these funding envelopes are oversubscribed to in a lot of cases. And I really want to take a little bit of time. I know when people talk about grants and application processes, it seems very simple. You apply, and then the money comes out, which is not always the case. There's a whole team behind that. I just wanted to highlight our program managers. We have 6 program managers over 7 streams. They come from different departments of the city in whichever specific area they are in. So the City Enrichment Fund is truly cross-departmental. We really engage with the city across. Each program manager is an expert in their area, and we really work together as a team to ensure that the full life cycle of the granting cycle runs as smooth as possible. I can't stress enough how much our program managers, we work as a team to work with the groups to make sure that they feel supported. And all this information in front of you today is because of the conversations we have with them, with internal staff, and we're consistently looking to how we can improve our processes, make it more efficient, more better, to really, truly enrich our community. Thank you.
Thank you to staff, and thank you for your succinct presentation. I really appreciate that very much. Do I have any questions? I see one speaker on the list right now, and I recognize for questions Councillor Alex Wilson.
Thank you. Would we be able to just go back a slide or two to the category breakdowns of funding? Oh. Yeah, thank you. Oh, that one. Perfect. Thank you. Is there a reason or a rationale? I mean, I think I anticipate there is. I understand that arts in general don't have a lot of other funding, so it seems like this is a very, very essential way, and I've spoken to artists in the community. They really appreciate this fund. This is used by a lot of folks. This makes sense, given that there's a lack of funding in other spaces. I also see that with community services. Just kind of using that as a prompt or a jumping off point, would you be able to kind of help break down these categories a little bit further and how they relate to outside funding streams that other folks may be accessing as well?
Whatever you prefer. Go ahead, yeah.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. So these funding categories were set up many years ago, and they've kind of been static with where they are. How they came about was the fact that it was, at that time, it made sense for how many applications were coming in at that time, what was going on in the community. To answer your question about whether this is the only area where people are applying, I think the important thing to know is with the various funding streams, it really depends on the stream or what they're applying to or the specific program. In some cases, depending on the program area, applicants don't have, or community groups that don't have anywhere else to go but to apply over to the City Enrichment Fund. We do hear that. So to your standpoint, when you were talking about like specific artists who, like, especially at the time when COVID hit, we really found a lot of our community groups right across the board saying that other funders were not there to support us. and they all came to the City Enrichment Fund, and that's often the case. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you, and apologies for not being clear. I was kind of looking at both why the differences between the funding, and what I heard was because more people apply to these streams originally, and so that's where it is. And then also kind of was asking about the relative scarcity of funding in the community and how that relates. And I think both of those got answered quite clearly. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
If I may, through the chair, just add on perhaps, where there is an underspend, because that happens some years in different streams, then we allocate them to where the need is. So it very much is dependent on the need, and I think that's reflected in how the envelopes look. The other thing I do want to mention and reference is throughout COVID, I think we saw different funds pop up through the federal government, which some of our community members were able to apply to or be eligible for. I also think locally, the Hamilton Community Foundation has been a great partner in helping facilitate connections. If we identify that either an organization is ineligible based on our criteria, perhaps we send them to other funders, and that's also something that we've been working really closely with other funders on. I think Ontario Trillium Foundation, and there's many more organizations, but I would say that with some of those provincial and federal streams, the processes are quite rigorous, and with many of these groups that apply to the City Enrichment Fund, they are volunteer groups, and most of the time they don't have like a paid grants coordinator or paid full-time staff that are writing these applications. I mean, Mimi fields a lot of inquiries from folks after traditional work hours because they're doing these in their volunteer time. So I just think that's important to add as well.
Thank you very much. And I see a second speaker on the list, and that is Councillor Beattie. Oh, I'm so sorry.
So sorry. No, it was entirely my fault. I thought Councillor Beattie wanted to come off the list, but he did want to stay on the list. So Councillor Beattie is actually next.
Not a worry. Thank you, and through the chair, without getting too far into the weeds, I'm wondering if you could give a high-level overview of some of the adjudication process or some of the considerations, and what I'm kind of specifically sifting for, again, without getting too operational, is there, during that adjudication process, something that speaks to economic spin-off, economic benefit, or what I like to call the multiplier effect. So we grant an organization $1, and then there's an economic benefit of 2 or 3 to the community. I'm wondering if there's anything you can speak to in that.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. Our adjudication process in terms of scoring, each of the program areas, and in a lot of cases the streams, have their own set scoring criteria, which is on our website in the guidelines, which often speak to it's scored based on organizational capacity, community impact. So there are specific scoring elements which are tied into that in terms of our adjudication and evaluation. So that's how that part of it is scored. In terms of the actual scoring, each adjudicator would be looking at the application, scoring it on those elements, and then the 3 adjudicators, the average of that score is what brings about that rating. And we're in the process also of revisiting how that scoring, what that looks like, whether those specific scoring elements make sense for today's time. Is anything missing? Does anything need to be added? So to your question, the answer would be we're right now looking at specifically what you said a little bit more in detail right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beattie. And next on the speakers list is Councillor Huang.
Thank you. Through the chair, what's the ideal project for the digital equity stream? Because 150,000 is great, but not a lot.
Through the chair to Councillor Wang, we have Kelly Austin on the line, who's actually the program manager that's supporting the intake for the digital equity program, so I would defer this question to her.
Hi everyone, Cyrus Traney, Chief Digital Officer. I know I don't look like Kelly, but I said I would take these on her behalf. Through you, Chair, to Council, we're looking for projects where there may be an opportunity to maybe teach digital skills to people. There may be opportunities for community groups to put in some technology like Wi-Fi. There may be programs where there are folks working with newcomers and they need assistance on upskilling as it relates to their digital skill sets. There could be other programs where they're developing online, training around digital skills that are specific to the community groups that they're servicing. So those are just a few areas that have potential, and we modeled this sort of off some similar grants that the Canadian Internet Registry Association offers. So hopefully I've answered your question. Happy to expand on that further if required.
Nope, thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you, Councillor Huang. And next up on the speakers list, I see Councillor Taddison.
Thank you. Through the chair to the delegates or the speakers. My first question was going to be about the consistent education or adjudication process, but it was mostly answered, or like you answered it through Councillor Beatty's questions. My next question then would go to, like Cyrus just explained, could we go through, say, each area of, say, agriculture? What would be one example of something that would come forward in an application, and then through communities, just one for each, just so I could get an overall picture of each?
Go ahead, maybe. Yeah.
Through you, Chair, to the councillors. So for agriculture, that's some of our applications that come through would be fairs, and specifically, I don't want to say specifically, but some of the fairs are the ones that come forward. Anything to do with any project which speaks specifically to our farmlands. So that would be agriculture. Agriculture only has one stream in it. For our arts area, and I'll go back to, in our arts area, our arts are operating. So, of course, as it states, anything which larger organizations which require an operating budget. So, in order to conduct arts operating, drama, theater, ensuring that the organization is operating throughout the year. That would be arts operating. Sorry, I'm not giving specific examples just to protect the integrity of our applicants.
Perhaps if it's helpful, like with agriculture, the Winona Peach Festival. Okay. On an annual basis, if they put in an application. With arts, we usually see Supercrawl. Like these are events that happen in the city, typically on an annual basis, where they apply for the programming dollars in order to operate or run the event. In the arts area, we also have individual artists that are funded. Does that paint a better picture for you, Councillor Taddison?
Sure, and just if you could go down to the environmental and sports active, just give me an example of what that would look like capacity building for environmental.
We have I want to give you some specifics in terms of environmental. Our projects would be Sustainable Hamilton, would be one of the events. Bark, some of those.
There's a few like urban farms, yes, and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when the funding rationale.
Sorry, one question. Could I ask you to say what bark is? Everybody may not know what bark is. So if you could just tell everybody what bark is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Bay Area Restoration Council.
Through the chair to Councillor Taddison, typically at the grants subcommittee meeting, there is a program overview that accompanies all of the funding rationale for each specific application, regardless of if they're recommended for funding or if they are not recommended for funding. So that's typically the meeting where we go through all of the applications, and you'll recognize a lot of those names because they're events and festivals and programs that operate within the city on a consistent basis.
And through you, Chair, to Councillor, everything is posted on the City Enrichment Fund webpage as well. So once funding is provided, Council approves all the grants. It's fully transparent on the city's webpage, the City Enrichment Fund webpage with all the organizations.
Thank you. I didn't mean to put you guys on the spot with that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taddison. I don't see any. Oh, no, I do. I apologize. There's a speaker, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. If I could, I'm showing my ignorance, if I could go back to the digital equity, $150,000. I've been thinking about Councillor Beatty's question of measuring output and therefore input.
Leave it open.
I know it's a new amount of money. Could you just clarify for me, have the criteria for that adjudication, has that been set yet? Through the chair? Sorry if I missed it.
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, that's already in the guidelines.
Okay.
It's posted right before intake and it's on our webpage as well.
Okay. So my apologies again for missing that. Could you just, what I thought I heard in the digital equity, Mr. Tarani's response was the purpose of the digital equity strategy, is it to enable people to be more engaged in civic life, or is the purpose of it to grant them the skills so they have a perhaps better chance of generating some sort of income in learning those skills? I'm just trying to understand the objectives of it, and that's my question. Thank you.
If I may, through the chair, if Cyrus is still on the line, I would defer to him. And also, if Cyrus is able to speak specifically to the criteria, I believe that would be helpful through the chair to the member of council as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cyrus Tranny, Chief Digital Officer. Through you to Councillor Wilson. To answer your question, both criteria are currently built into the evaluation process. So we're looking for areas potentially where people could help build technology skills, or it could be areas as well where they're facilitating maybe access to connectivity. And when we think about the digital divide, there's really three areas. One is lack of access. The second is lack of access to the technology to get connected, and lack of skills. And roughly, loosely stated at a high level, those are the three domains that that specific pilot stream is targeting.
Thank you. And I don't see any further questions from Councillor Maureen Wilson. I see we've exhausted the speakers list. Thanks very much to city staff for the presentation.
Thank you.
May I please have a mover and seconder to receive this presentation? I see a move by Alex Wilson, seconded by Councillor Taddison. Can I have an electronic vote on that, please? And I'll say this now, I think that if you have comments on this report, when we move and second it and get it out there for receipt, you could do so. I'll just look around at that moment to see if anyone, but otherwise we need, sorry. Okay, the vote carried, thank you. So at this point, I need a mover and a seconder to receive the report itself. Can I have a mover to do that? Councillor Alex Wilson, I see a seconder in Councillor Huang. We'll have a quick question. Does anybody have any questions or specific comments they'd like to make on the report itself? Seeing none, let's go to the vote. And that vote carries unanimously as well. Thank you. We're moving on to 8.2, but before we do that, I want to just recognize a slight mistake I made, I overlooked something. I know that we have a delegate, 8.3, who's a volunteer chair of an advisory committee, and they'll be sticking around for items 10.1, 10.2, and 10.3. So if somebody would be willing to move that we actually do it, so 8.3 happens, and then section 10, so we do consent items afterwards so that the delegate can be here in a sequence without having to take up time wading through any questions that might come through 9. So basically what I'm asking is, can we switch section 10 and 9 around? I see Councillor Tattison moving that. Do I have a seconder to do that? Councillor Alex Wilson, and there'll be an electronic vote on that as well. Thank you. Yes. It's okay.
My apologies. I clicked on the next item. I wasn't prepared. So it is, I have it correct. It's just the title is not correct because it's under the wrong heading.
I promise I'll be more prepared in the future. Thanks so much. We're on to item 8.2, Office of the City Auditor Overview. This is report AUD 22008, citywide. City Auditor Brown is here to present to the committee an overview of the Office of the City Auditor. And so I'll allow now some time for City Auditor Brown to get the presentation ready, and then we'll hear from the auditor, have questions, and then comments.
Through the chair, good morning, everyone. I'm Charles Brown, City Auditor. I've been with the city since 2016. Prior to that, I spent many years in the Ontario Public Service in different roles. Today, I'm going to review for you what our office does, the responsibilities and authorities that it has, and how it serves council and the public. Our mandate is to provide council and the public with assurance, which amounts to our professional opinion about the efficiency and effectiveness of different city programs and functions that we choose to audit. Our objective is to ensure risks are managed appropriately and cost effectively, and to facilitate improved operations by way of the recommendations that we make. The most basic description of our purpose and intent comes from the Municipal Act and is contained in our charter: to assist council in holding itself and its administrators accountable for the quality of stewardship and the achievement of value for money in municipal operations. We do this primarily through audits and investigations that we conduct, or which we have third parties conduct that we oversee. The scope of our audits can be fairly broad in keeping with a modern approach, and it can sometimes change in the course of an audit. In terms of a general framework for how we approach an audit, we typically look to evaluate the adequacy and effectiveness of governance and oversight, of risk management processes, the level of compliance with prescribed policies or standards, the adequacy of internal control mechanisms deployed to mitigate risk and make operations efficient as possible, the quality delivered and performance obtained in achieving city objectives, and of course, the value for money achieved by city functions and services. Besides the broad scope value for money audits, which are the primary tool that we use to deliver our mandate, there are other types of services. We conduct compliance and control audits that more narrowly focus on specific policies, processes, and whether they're being followed. So an example there would be P-card. Are people following the rules and processes properly? Follow-up audits, where we go in 2 to 3 years after an audit report was issued to see what improvements have been made and the recommendations that have been implemented. Risk assessments, where we look at a project or perhaps a new initiative that is underway to evaluate the risks that might threaten success of the project. Or special assignments requested by council. An example of this occurred in 2016 when a motion was passed to have us look at the city's performance measurement regime. We are charged with the responsibility of conducting investigations of wrongdoing. And from time to time, we look at projects that went off the rails to evaluate what went wrong and what lessons can be learned. Our overall plan for the term of council is called the Audit Work Plan, and it is presented in the spring after we've had a chance to get input from each and every councillor. And to service that plan, we have 7 full-time resources, and we will sometimes hire outside experts or firms to help us. This is the logo that we have for our fraud and waste hotline. It's an important tool that facilitates the reporting of potential wrongdoing or waste. The hotline was launched in 2019 as a 3-year pilot to allow employees and citizens to confidentially report suspicions of fraud or waste. It was instigated by the fact that we had a formal whistleblower policy, but very little uptake, very few persons coming forward with complaints. Prior to its implementation, we were getting 2 to 5 allegations in any given year. When we implemented the hotline, we right away jumped to 80. So it's a tool that facilitates the receipt of information. It's also a tool that other major cities have been using. Toronto and Ottawa, for example, have a hotline. The way we handle complaints is to evaluate them as they come in, and we then decide whether to investigate them or perhaps refer them to other parties. If we refer them, we may or may not require a report back, depending on the circumstances. Hotline activities, including a summary of the investigation issues and conclusions, are reported publicly to this committee in our annual report. The latest hotline year ended in June this year, and the annual report will be coming to you early in the new year. While fraud, or more generally wrongdoing, don't happen every day, it is a risk to any large organization. We not only want to uncover it, but we approach it as an opportunity to learn how we can better protect the city and taxpayer dollars. So you might be prompted to ask or wonder, what is our authority? Where does it come from? Our authority is identified in the council-approved Office of the City Auditor Charter, which cites the Municipal Act. And it gives full, free, and unrestricted access to any and all records, property, and personnel relevant to any function that we are reviewing. And the authority to conduct audits and reviews of all city departments, members of council, agencies, boards, and commissions, as well as other entities the city is related to or has an interest in. A very important step was taken by council in 2012 to appoint the city auditor as an auditor general. And as an auditor general, it means I hold the responsibilities, powers, duties, and protections under section 223.19 to .23 of the Municipal Act. And we'll go into that in the coming slides. First off, I'll speak to the issue of the independence of the Auditor General. It's very important for our office to be and be seen to be independent to inspire the confidence of the public. This is provided for in our charter and in the Municipal Act. For example, the Act says, the Auditor General shall perform his or her responsibilities in an independent manner. Some of the ways that happens includes the fact that our office reports functionally to the Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee. The audit reports that we write go directly to this committee. Our charter prescribes that our activities are to remain free of influence by any element in the organization, including audit selection, the determination of scope, timing, etc. Independence is also assured by audit not having operational responsibility over any activity that it reviews. Audit reports come in two formats, so there are generally two formats you will see for an audit. There's a short format where we comment on the compliance and control issues and simply state what the weakness is and what the recommendation is. And then there's the long form value for money audits that would be typical of what you would see Ontario's Auditor General, Canada's Auditor General, that are longer in nature and broader in terms of the scope of issues that they cover. Draft reports before release and presentation to this committee and to the public are provided to departmental management so that we can include their comment and response to our recommendations. The time allowed for that is 2 weeks. On the more major audits, we schedule follow-up audits to review corrective actions taken on our original audit, and that happens anywhere from 12 to 36 months in terms of time frame. This next slide shows some of the implications and responsibilities I have in being an Auditor General for the city. As described in the Act, the Auditor General shall perform duties in an independent manner. That means reporting to Council through this committee, being responsible for assisting Council in holding itself and administrators accountable, is entitled to have access to any information necessary to perform their duties, has a duty of confidentiality with respect to knowledge acquired or coming to their attention, has authority to audit grant recipients, has the power to examine under oath and to summon and compel witnesses and documents using the powers of the Public Inquiries Act, is not a compellable witness in a civil proceeding, and isn't causing any waiver of privilege in receiving solicitor-client privileged information. And finally, cannot be compelled to produce information under freedom of information. There are 3 policies of the city that we are involved in. There is a whistleblower bylaw that provides a way for employees to disclose wrongdoing and to have it impartially investigated if considered serious wrongdoing. And by serious wrongdoing, we mean criminal code violations, code of conduct, fraud, misappropriation, also potential harm to safety, as well as reprisals. We make semi-annual reports on activity, the activity levels, and then once a year we do the hotline annual report. This policy existed before the hotline, and so the hotline is a tool that helps facilitate intake as well as case management. There's also a fraud policy and protocol that requires the reporting of suspicions of fraud to our office and provides us the authority to investigate. And the third one is there's a cash handling policy under which we make unannounced spot checks and require cash handling areas of the city to self-assess the adequacy of their processes, and we follow up on those self-assessments. At the beginning of term of council, I will meet with each council member to hear if you have any particular concerns, and I'll share what I'm thinking insofar as audits, and of course the ones that have already been launched that we would like to complete. And that will result in an audit work plan, which is meant to apply to the entire term of council. So it basically will consist of a list of audits that we propose to the meeting. At the meeting, it'll be I'll have a list of audits we propose to bring to council. And once approved, that becomes our work plan. We have on that list, we have a kind of A list, the preferred audits, but also a B list, because sometimes when we get to the A list audit, for various reasons and circumstances, we need to put off the timing of that. And so we go to the B list. So a new policy that we adopted this last term of council, which you'll be hearing more about later, it's called the Serious Matters Reporting Policy. And it deals with circumstances where our office gets a complaint that is serious enough that we will report the fact that we have received the complaint. Like normally investigations that we do, we report them to you when they're finished in our annual report and give a summary. But there's certainly, one can presume that there would be a need to know about investigations that we have started. So what we did with this policy is we developed some criteria under which we would proactively report the fact that we had a complaint. And you see those criteria listed here. So we will come to you proactively with this information that we've launched an investigation if we perceive that the issue could pose a threat, a cybersecurity threat to the organization's information systems, for example, a major privacy breach, if the issue would threaten public safety, if it could have a significant adverse effect on vulnerable populations, if it involves a fraud over $100,000, or if it results in investigation by us and there has been a referral to the police. So if we have made a referral to the police, we come and tell you about that. And finally, if in my judgment, it's deemed to be of a significant risk to the corporation. So just a few past reports you may be interested to know. This year, we did an audit of DARTS, which is the city's accessible transit service. And this one was with respect to the adequacy of their maintenance and inspection of vehicles. In that case, the vehicle's condition was found to be very poor, and they had inadequate maintenance practices. And it was not only DARTS itself maintaining vehicles, but they had 3 subcontracted organizations that were doing this on their behalf. One was called the Great Myarena Project, and this was, I mentioned earlier about a lessons learned. So this was a project that went off the rails, and so we wanted to take the opportunity to learn some lessons about what we could improve and do better to manage construction projects. And it focused on things that could be done better from a project management, but also a legal perspective. The legal frameworks and advice were looked at very closely. There were 2 audits of the roads program, looking at all aspects of operations, be it asset management, pavement design, condition assessments, quality assurance, testing, preservation, road utility cuts, procurement, financial controls, etc. And we did it in 2 phases. Part 1 identified issues with the quality of asphalt and the adequacy of testing, preservation and maintenance, asset management, etc. Part 2, we looked at quality assurance and validation related to aggregates, which are the stone component of a road, and weight-based contracts in particularly that had issues. We looked at the Hamilton Future Fund and presented our report this year, and there were findings related to administration and the need for strategic direction. We did 2 audits of cybersecurity, including one specifically on the security of mobile devices, and we made recommendations to improve the protection from cyber fraud and malicious attacks. So I currently have these, it's quite a long list. I currently have these audits underway. Very shortly, you'll be seeing the one on cemeteries administration. Cemeteries it's quite unique in the organization because it's actually a trust, and it has to be administered as a trust on behalf of the beneficiaries of the trust. So and it's very complex, as you will discover. Transfer payments and grants, how the city administers transfer payments, the frameworks that are used to ensure sound stewardship and value. We have been looking at the personal use of city vehicles, and we'll be reporting on that. We have an audit on the quality management of road construction in new development. So when we did our roads audit, we did not look at specifically, it's a different area of the city that looks after the roads in new development areas, subdivisions. So we're taking a look at that with the knowledge that we have. An audit of Hamilton water metering program. That one we used, that's an example of one where we used a third party with our oversight, of course, and we will be bringing that one shortly. It's in a draft report stage right now. Audit of employee benefits management and administration, a review of equity, diversity, and inclusion, that initiative, and then stormwater asset management is something we started our research on, and then, of course, recently, the events with respect to the unknown disclosure into sewage into the harbor, that's prompted us to include that in scope. And then lastly, we've undertaken an audit of real estate, specifically in the areas of leases and licensing and that administration. So finally, I just thought I would note to you something that you might find helpful. The Canadian Audit and Accountability Foundation, this is a nonprofit organization that you may be interested in checking out. And they've been around for many years. They have been researching and promoting best practices in value for money auditing, for example. They go way back. Quite a respected organization and with their research on how to do value for money auditing. But I found out that they even offer free training to municipal councillors. So if you go to their site, which I have at the bottom there, you can check it out, see if you're interested in that. It might be helpful. So that's my presentation. I'll answer any questions as best I can.
Thank you, City Auditor Brown, for your presentation. I see a speaker on the list, Councillor Alex Wilson.
Thank you, and I'll keep this quick. I really, really appreciate the work of the Auditor's Office. So essential in keeping us all accountable and giving us information. I know I use the value for money audits on the roads, on the doors, and the information that consistently throughout the election. As a result, I have more questions than we're going to be able to get into today, so I'll just ask one, hopefully very easy one. In what month are those meetings with new councillors happening? Is that in December, January?
Typically, I start in January.
Perfect.
I start in January. And it'll be, by the time I get all my meetings done and we synthesize the information, it'll probably come in the springtime with our proposed audit work plan.
Thank you. And through the chair, would all councillors actually be able to be sent the past terms work plan so we have an idea of what we're working towards?
Yes, I'll discuss
in advance of those meetings?
I'll discuss that with you in the meeting. And perhaps, too, if you can advise your admins the importance of this meeting, so that we don't, the sooner I can meet with you, the better it is, and the sooner we can get the plan formulated.
Consider me eager.
Thanks. Just to clarify, you were asking for the work plan from the previous term of council to be sent in advance of the meeting. Is that right?
Oh, you're asking in advance? Oh, sure. Sure, we can do that, no problem. That's on our website, but sure, we can furnish that, yeah.
Thank you, City Auditor Brown. I notice there's other speakers. So I'd like to welcome second speaker, Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, just a question in terms of the tracking of recommendations. And this may be a question that would be answered later on in our cycle as a committee. But I'm just curious in terms of recommendations made, how do we track the implementation of those recommendations as a reporting mechanism that comes back to this body to get an update on where we are in terms of the implementation of those recommendations?
So that is through the chair. That's through our follow-up process. Typically, what you'll see is something like completed. Each recommendation will say completed, or partially completed, or it might not even be started. And so we've had some of those issues in the past. So it's up to us to bring that information back to you periodically. For us to do that, of course, we have to go out to the program. And the starting point is them giving us the % completion of all the recommendations. Now, there are occasions where, and this is something to consider, there are occasions where this committee has decided that the issue is significant enough that they want to table, timelines for a report back from the program area. I'm thinking of DARTS, I think, is one where, it's a pretty, public safety is involved, and I think they've scheduled actual times at which the program area is coming back to report the implementation of the recommendations in that case. So that's something to consider when you hear our audit report. If you're thinking this is an issue like that, someone might want to put that right into the requirements to report back on a certain date.
Thank you. And just so that I understand it through the chair, then there is a mechanism built in for regular reporting back, or whatever the number is, quarterly or whatever that is, the regular reporting back on the implementations of the recommendations, but then this committee does have the authority to create a quicker timeline for reporting back of specific audit recommendations. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Beattie. Before I turn to the next speaker, just want to say how I'm timing today. I forgot to mention that. There's been some differences in how that's happening. I'm just timing what you're saying as councillors, not timing the answers from staff. So I just want to make that transparent. Sorry about that. And the next speaker on the list is Councillor Taddison.
Through the chair, I just have a question. I recognize that you operate independently. When you require the need for a third party or initiate a third-party review, does that come through council? What's the process? Do you have that complete power to just initiate that on your own, or is that something done through council or through city manager?
So that's something that I have the discretion to do. If it gets to be a certain, I forget, I think it's over 100,000, I will then confer with the city manager on the funds for that. If it gets to be over 250, then we come to council for the funding approval for that. That's what we've done in the past.
Thank you for explaining that. Through the chair, I'm finished.
Thank you, Councillor Taddison. If Councillor Huang as Vice Chair would just take over, I just have a couple questions to ask.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your report, City Auditor Brown. I noticed that you talked a lot about your legislative authority, and that was good, a good summary. You talked a little bit about the manner in which you construct your reports to council, but your work plan. My question for you is, to what extent do you feel like you're proactively doing certain things? Like, as an observer of what's happening at the city, you may recognize at times, or the office may recognize at times, oh, and so then do you proceed with the O, or do you really primarily or mostly take direction from council about where they see those things happening, and then you act or react to those? And so I don't think I understand the balance there. I was curious about that.
Yes, it is a balanced approach. According to our charter, I do have the sole discretion when it comes to audit scope and selection, but I do like to know and have the input. So there are some projects that we do that are at my discretion, and most typically those would be ones where I initiate that aren't on the audit work plan. And the reason that we do them and they're not on the plan is that we have a fraud and waste hotline. Well, it might not be a fraud, so it might not be an investigation, but it might be a waste allegation that's quite significant. And after our preliminary assessment of the information, we nod our heads and agree there might be an issue here. So that's a case of where at my discretion I initiate an audit. So for example, we had a payroll fraud a couple of years ago, and that prompted us to actually audit the payroll system because of the weaknesses. DARTS is another example. It was both an investigation but also an audit of what, how do we protect ourselves against this? Another example that I listed to you was the benefits administration. That wasn't on the audit plan, but it was initiated by the fact that the city, there was abuse that was uncovered, and so we want to audit the whole system. So there are those occasions where I will use my discretion to undertake an audit, and those are the typical circumstances.
Thank you, Auditor Brown. Councillor Crutch.
Thanks, and my second and last question is more about the kind of process that the audit undertakes when it becomes enacted or engaged. So you talked about your audit work plan. For instance, Mayor Horvath brought up a notice of motion about the potential for an audit. And so I want to understand the timeline. So my question is about that. So that notice of motion comes forward, eventually it becomes a motion, eventually it gets voted on. At what point does the audit kick in? That's my very first question. And then my follow-up to that will ask more specifically about and what does that mean from the perspective of that issue in terms of is it prorogued now to the audit process and nothing just gets discussed about it by council until the audit is done, or how does that all work? That's my question. I hope that was clear.
Auditor Brown?
So if I interpret your question correctly, the audit, first of all, the audit starts when the motion is approved. That's what happened when we did our review of performance measures in the city and a dashboard and so forth. And there was, I think there was a time commitment in that one as well. At that point, I follow the rules of the charter. We have the sole discretion in matters of audit selection and scope. There is a scope laid out, but of course it's the how you do that, how you go about that. And we make our report to council independently to serve the objectives. It would be no different than a public inquiry. You give out the scope to the inquiry, but they have the discretion to follow up on matters that feed those objectives. So I hope I'm answering what you're driving at.
Thank you. Councillor?
I think so. I'm just going to clarify just to make sure I understand. So what you're saying is you do an audit, you define the scope for that audit, and then you get underway to do certain things. As things, though, may intersect with that audit or feed that audit, those may be things that are independent of that. The council could still continue on doing work on that don't impact the audit. Or is the audit about the topic, and then that's it, the topic's off the table so the audit is done? That's what I'm trying to understand.
You mean, could there be another activity outside of that to improve operations?
Yeah, sure.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes that's necessary. I'll give you an example of it. Things like that can happen in the course of an audit. If we were looking at an IT system, for example, and we found weaknesses, we would bring those perhaps to the attention too, under the serious matters, that this needs to be addressed right away. We're not going to wait for the audit to be complete. If something needs attention immediately, I think it's right and proper to have those addressed. Otherwise, you've got this exposure out there waiting for the audit to finish, and there is a significant time lag with any audit, even in getting the responses from management, getting it into the queue for committee. Those add potentially months to the process at the end. So for those serious issues, of course, there shouldn't be anything. We shouldn't be stopping management from doing. And if we see that and it happens before we actually draft a report, we'll comment on that activity taking place.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions, Councillor Critch?
Thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you for the clear answer.
Back to you.
Thank you. So I see we have no further speakers. Oh, no, I'm not right. I can just look over here and find it every time. And so I turn to Councillor Taddison, a second-time speaker.
Through the chair. I just have a question about the work you do and the results of the work you do. When you conduct an audit, is there at any time when you consider the cost savings going forward, and is that documented anywhere? What's the financial benefits of doing the audit? I know in some certain cases it's I'm saying, if we're looking for efficiencies in the system as opposed to looking for fraud or something like that. I'm just talking about helping City Hall work more efficiently.
I can remember when I first came, we were asked to do that. We provided an assessment of, different things. I mean, there could be cost savings associated with recommendations, but of course that can only happen if they're implemented fully. So you have to make some assumptions sometimes in the way, you portray those numbers. But there are also a lot of benefits outside of that. What do you say about mitigating risk how do you attach a value to the mitigation of risk? How do you attach a value to, finding out that DIRTS is not operating safe vehicles? So in terms of what you get out of an audit, the benefits, if you just focus on the cost saving, it can be problematic from that standpoint because you're missing a lot of the benefit.
And through the chair, I understand that, and I was just wondering, if there's recommendations or any audits that you've done that look at the efficiencies as opposed to those risk benefits and so forth. I understand that, and I see the value of audits totally. I just wanted to say, are there any times when you've seen an audit that's actually improved and made things work more efficiently so that there is an actual cost savings that we can project forward?
Well, one that comes to mind is DIRTS, but not the. It was the eligibility audit. There were some recommendations that we made in there, some observations that we made in there about ways to save money but enhance revenues as well. So that's an example where we do point out potential savings in administration as well as changing the model, so to speak. But again, it's something that has to be implemented to be realized.
I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Auditor Brown.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Auditors. City Auditor Brown, I don't see any further speakers. At this point, can I have a mover and a seconder to receive the Auditor's presentation? I see that moved by Councillor Alex Wilson and seconded by Councillor Mark Taddison. A vote will magically appear on your screen momentarily. That vote carries, and of course it's not actually magic, it's the labor of our staff, so thank you. And now a motion to move and second the report itself. I see a move from Alex Wilson, Councillor Alex Wilson, and seconded by Councillor Taddison. Is there any discussion on the report itself? Seeing none, we'll turn to the vote. Without surprise, that also carries. We're on to item 8.3, which is the Hamilton Women and Gender Equity Committee's annual report for 2022. We have the chair of the committee, Deanna Allain, here to present their annual report. And let's give a few minutes for Deanna to get set up, and welcome, Delegate Allain. Before you get started, I just wanted to ask if you wanted more than 5 minutes worth of time, or if you thought 5 minutes would do it, just so we can do that now before we start.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry to the chair. As it is the annual presentation, there is no time limit.
Oh, nice. That's even nicer. Lovely. Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to confirm before I go, am I able to, how do I just get there to be able to move to the next? Okay.
Do you want me to move this up here for you?
Oh, no, it's okay. Awesome, thank you. So thank you very much for having me today to speak on behalf of the Women and Gender Equity Advisory Committee. I assumed the role of chair partway through this last year, so I'm a little bit fresh to the role, but thank you for bearing with me because I haven't done a presentation like this before, but I'm really excited to be here. So just a brief overview of the committee. So our mandate is, as the Women and Gender Equity Committee, previously named the Hamilton Status of Women Committee for the City of Hamilton, it acts as an advisory committee on matters pertaining to gender inequities faced by women, trans, and non-binary individuals. It achieves this mandate by providing council input on matters of municipal concern and evaluating the city on its related efforts.
Our terms of reference, they were updated in the previous year, but we've also put a request through that you'll be reviewing today. The addition that we're requesting that you'll be discussing shortly is to include the following: that the committee identify the needs of women, trans, and non-binary individuals in the community and evaluate requests for support in collaboration with stakeholders working with equity-seeking groups within the City of Hamilton. With respect to stakeholder engagement, we received presentations this past year from HSR respecting equity in hiring and recruitment and Hamilton Health Sciences. We have expressed interest in having staff presentations to support our understanding of the budget process. We've been working with our liaison to determine the best course of action to receive that support. We have also engaged with YWCA Hamilton to support and promote the Women of Distinction Awards and Elect More Women events. We continue to support the work of Sisters in Spirit Hamilton and recently contributed funds toward a ribbon skirt to honor a community member. Over the course of this past year, the Women and Gender Equity Advisory Committee engaged with Council through committee reports, applying a gender equity lens on recommendations and updating its terms of reference and committee name. The committee's membership has significantly reduced over the course of the term, and staff supported the committee in welcoming 8 new members in April of this year. The committee provided a citizen committee report respecting recommendations to re-implement the encampment protocol and provided a delegation at the request of council on the subject as well. The committee recently developed citizen committee reports on inclusionary zoning and developing a winter housing strategy, also items you'll be reviewing today, and is considering future reports that align with the committee mandate. With respect to future plans, the committee has indicated interest in receiving a status update on the menstrual products pilot and recommending the continuation and expansion of the pilot. In our last meeting, we actually received a presentation on this as well. Additionally, the committee plans to develop citizen committee reports respecting the impact of COVID-19 on women, trans, and non-binary people, and exploring ways in which the committee and the City of Hamilton could better support survivors of domestic violence. We also wanted to make you aware that the committee had not been consulted or advised of any changes to the Code of Conduct, and we have requested staff support in receiving additional information to provide feedback. Council voted to make changes in January of 2022 and did not reach out to citizen advisory committees for feedback and did not send the Code of Conduct to the Hamilton Women and Gender Equity Committee. Sorry about that. Sorry, so that is the full presentation. We did just want to make you aware of that. We have received it, the Code of Conduct to review in our last meeting, but we were never consulted in that process.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Delegate Elaine. Are there any speakers on this presentation? Okay, I recognize Councillor Huang, and I'll add myself at the very end as well.
Thank you so much for your presentation. So you just did mention that you did receive an update of the menstrual products pilot then? And so what is the normal frequency that, say, staff would do presentations to your advisory committee?
So generally it is at the request of the committee. So our staff liaison, Morgan, who's incredible, we wouldn't be able to function without her. She's the best. She helps to arrange for presentations to take place. So I understand we might be receiving another update, and through having someone come through to speak with us, we're also going to be able to help advise on any final reports as well.
Wonderful. And then I understand that you do have several reports that you would like to put in front of this council. One of the challenges, I think, was I saw that the inclusionary zoning report, although as the last couple of days have indicated, that may or may not be helpful just because of Bill 23 and such. So what is the normal frequency, or what are the challenges with putting information in front of this council that you guys have that maybe we should bring up here?
Yeah, thank you. So some of the key things within our committee, we do meet on a monthly basis. One of the biggest challenges we experienced had to do with reaching quorum and the extreme decline that we had. We had a point where our membership was only about 6 people up until us welcoming new people, so that there was a bit of a delay to being able to add more folks in. And so if we weren't able to meet quorum, that meant that we had another period of time that we'd have to wait. We have established, we're going to be developing some working groups to help so that we can develop reports and be able to put them through. But at the same time, we'd have to be able to present that in committee and then send it to you. And again, it's just because of that month-by-month delay. And if we miss quorum for a period, then that's going to be an entire month before you're able to see it.
I see. Is there anything that we can do to help with that?
I'm not quite sure. One of the other limitations that we experienced before with the encampment protocol motion was that we initially in the committee, we clarified that it would be able to be put through as a motion, and then it wasn't put on the agenda for the following meeting by the committee. And then I believe the previous chair was notified by email that it would have to go through as a citizen committee report. It wound up being delayed by almost 3 months. And so it was after winter had even taken place that we were discussing the encampment protocol because of the administrative delay as well.
All right. Thank you so much for bringing those challenges to light, and perhaps that's something that at this council and committee that we can figure out how do we support that and how do we make that a little more efficient. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Huang. And the next person I see on our speakers list is Councillor Tattison.
Oh. Through the chair, thank you for being here. I remember the first time I had to present in front of city staff here and the council, my heart was jumping out of my chest, so I can appreciate where you're coming from. And that was 23 years ago. Councillor Wang actually asked the questions I was going to ask, so thanks for those answers, and I appreciate the efforts that you're making. I'm finished. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm the next person on the speakers list, so if Councillor Huang wouldn't mind as Vice Chair taking over, that would be great.
Perfect. Happy to do that.
Thank you. And through the chair to the delegate, I'll be real blunt, and then I'll ask my question real quick, and I'll make some comments in a bit. As a former chair of an advisory committee, I really feel this slide hard. And I wanted to ask, on your committee, what were the impacts that you observed in your conversations there when you didn't get access to the real feedback process that you thought you needed to talk about citizen advisory committees and their code of conduct, and like, what do you see are improvements to that process? What do you need, right, as a citizen advisory committee to make that work make sense to you?
To our speaker.
Absolutely, thank you. So I think that one of the biggest challenges that we had during that time, of course, we were onboarding new members, but the only information that had been provided, it was never provided to the committee itself. The only time an actual copy has ever been sent to our committee was in our last meeting. It was as part of another agenda item to review for the procedural handbook. That's the first time it's ever been sent to our committee for review. In terms of the impact, there were invites to training or orientation on the code of conduct that was sent to individual committee members. They were held, I believe there was a couple of in-person sessions that were held before even people were allowed to sit in this council chamber due to the pandemic. And so if we were uncomfortable with attending those sessions, initially there wasn't even a virtual option. After we had the opportunity, some of us reached out to some counselors to raise concern, and then there was a virtual training that was offered only during business hours. And so those of us who work during the day, for example, I'm off on vacation right now, so I can be here, you know, we'd have to take a day off of work and assume that cost ourselves to be able to receive that training. There was no recorded option to be able to receive that. It seemed like an unnecessary expense. That's just my opinion, of course, not the committee itself, but I do know that was a struggle that maybe 3 or 4 of those who were on the committee actually received the training.
Councillor Crutch.
Thank you so much for sharing a bit more about that experience. Could you suggest, can you think of ways that that can be improved? Like, what do you think would have made it easier for you? And you've talked a bit to the impacts in terms of the scheduling and training, but I mean, in terms of the feedback process overall, like how would that have maybe functioned better, and how could that have worked from your perspective?
Yeah, so I am aware that in the previous term, when this was initially discussed in January, Councillor, I believe it was Councillor Wilson, had put forward a motion to try and have consultation go through to the committees, and that was turned down. I think that ultimately, I mean, looking in hindsight, of course, allowing committees a period of time, typically just understanding how it works with quorum and things like that, allowing for at least a 2-month window for feedback is ideal and most accessible for committees. That allows us to develop working groups and things like that at the same time. I think that as far as what this committee could do to be most supportive is potentially to reopen that for consideration. You know, code of conduct can be changed. And so if the committee was was willing to go forward and provide the opportunity for feedback to all of the committees to formally request that. Oftentimes committees have to be proactive and seek out issues to advise on. We're very rarely reached out to advise on issues.
Councillor Crutch.
Thank you so much. I hear that. And I wonder, the last question I have for you was just about citizen committee reports themselves. And so you talked about a kind of a lag time, right? So you're trying to get things to happen, but then there's like this machinery that prevents you from getting the things to happen in the way, I'm summarizing what you said, machinery that prevents it from getting done in a way that I think would be timely and would reduce the impacts brought forward by the citizen committee report itself. Could you speak to how that process might be improved or ideas you had for what can happen there?
That's a good question. I would say one of the biggest challenges in terms of delay, now that, and of course, I'm still relatively new into the chair role, so I do oftentimes help to facilitate, as you might have experienced as well, in terms of the committee report writing. One of the bigger limitations was not knowing exactly when a report was going to be necessary as opposed to a motion going forward. And that confusion led to a lot of delays, sometimes by months, that we would be following up, only to find out that nothing was going forward despite us moving for something to go forward because it should have gone through in a different format. I'm not sure if maybe that comes down to additional resources and training that either we'd be provided with or we'd be requesting. Again, it's still a bit of a learning curve for us to be able to get into that groove. I found that was probably the biggest impact that we had, was those delays that could have been easily prevented by better clarification. I wouldn't fault that by our staff liaison, of course. We were all operating to the best of our ability, but sometimes, what we move forward with and what all of our intentions are, we're not necessarily as proactively contacted to address that so that it can be on the next agenda as soon as possible.
Thank you. Those are my questions. I really appreciate your answers.
Back to you, Cameron. Councillor Crutch.
Thank you. I see a speaker on the list. It's Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you very much. Just my apologies in advance to my committee members. My request to speak button wasn't working, and so my apologies. Thank you very much for your presentation, and it was very, very informative. I'm excited about your future plans, and I'm wondering, I know you have offered the caveat that you're relatively new to the role. Will the committee be deliberating on whether this is the most appropriate standing committee to report to? Because if I'm looking at the menstrual product and the impact of COVID, all extremely important things to assess and consider, I'll leave that question with you, whether in your opinion at this time or perhaps you will offer it later in the term, whether this you think is the most appropriate standing committee. Thank you, through the chair.
Thank you. I will say, especially because I'm here in the capacity as chair, I don't want to speak too far from my own personal opinion. It hasn't been discussed to the committee. I do thank you for the question, though, because it's something that I think is very valuable to have a conversation about. One of the challenges we had as well with the report we put forward before about the encampment protocol was that we put it forward. Of course, there was that delay of months because we put through a motion instead of a report, and then the committee itself wasn't notified. It was only the chair that had been notified privately. So we were still meeting assuming that things were flowing, and then we saw that it hadn't reached an agenda item, and that's when we were prompted to follow up to find out what had taken place. In terms of the challenges as well, we were invited to come forward and provide a presentation to answer questions, and we were brought to AFNA to answer questions about the encampment protocol, but like you said, it's reviewed by a different committee. And so initially it had been that we were being asked to attend multiple meetings, which, especially during the day, like I said, for someone like myself to come out, it's at a bit of a cost personally, and so it wasn't possible to attend multiple meetings, and so there actually weren't any questions when I'd come to present, because it wasn't at the appropriate committee. So I do think it's something that we'll be considering, at least, if not in this term, possibly in the next.
Thank you. A subsequent question. Going back to, I know the request was made and the change was made, the change of the name of the committee. I was wondering if you could offer a few thoughts on the importance of that change and what it means for the scope of work and for your committee. Thank you. Through the chair.
Absolutely. So I do think that it's important. I think that in particular, when we talk about representing women, trans, and gender nonconforming people in the city of Hamilton, there isn't a committee that's dedicated to trans and gender nonconforming people. And people who are not cisgendered men, they all share that same or similar lacking privilege, and that's where a committee is necessary to be able to gather all that information. I think in terms of gender-based violence and experiences like that, they're often shared, even if someone is a cisgender woman or a trans woman or gender nonconforming. They're all in many ways different, and they have to be considered in those different ways. But the way that it can be advocated for can be in a much more collaborative space. I think that, in itself, changing a name doesn't necessarily change the committee, but it helps to move that attitude forward to a more inclusive space.
Thank you. I agree with you. Changing the name can sometimes be symbolic, but sometimes, in my opinion, it has deep meaning in speaking to the experiences and the responsibility and the necessary matters to inform the work and the intent. So thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, and thank you, Delegate Elaine. There are no further speakers on the list, so I'll now ask for there to be a mover and seconder to receive the presentation. I see it's moved by Councillor Alex Wilson and it's seconded by Councillor Tammy Huang, and I'd ask at this point if I could make a motion and pass this to the chair. This is an appropriate place to make a motion related to the presentation.
So to the chair, the presentation is to be received. If we want to vote on the presentation, and then if you want to make a further motion, we certainly could.
Cool, let's do that. And that vote carries. And if Councillor Huang, who's doing double duty as chair today, and I appreciate it, would take the chair, I just want to put forward a motion.
Please, Councillor Crutch.
I move, and I'm looking for a seconder, that advisory committees be consulted with about the code of conduct and a report come back summarizing the feedback on the code of conduct before it's finally approved, before it's implemented, pardon me, I should say, because I think it's already been approved, before it's implemented. That's my motion.
Councillor Wilson, you have a question?
I do, thank you. Procedurally, I don't know whether I'm in the right spot. I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate to inform our decision on the motion, whether we could look to staff to provide an overview of that process and of that code of conduct and kind of what informed that decision or practice.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Crutch, is that something you might want to amend?
I don't know.
I'll look to the chair and to the legislative coordinator, McCrae, for the process of how this motion is being moved, seconded, and commented on.
So my apologies. Through the chair, Councillor Wilson, you're requesting what was done in the past for the previous code of conduct training. So Lorraine Kohler, one of our other legislative coordinators, she sent out an email to all staff liaisons, and my understanding is advisory committee members at the time as well, respecting the code of conduct training that was happening both in person and virtually. If people were not able to attend that session, there was also a PowerPoint presentation that was part of the code of conduct training that was sent out to all committee members as well at that time, and I believe it was end of October 2021. Was that your question? Okay.
Yeah. Could I just, may I, through the chair? So the code of conduct was, there was a revision and there was consultation and there were different platforms in which were afforded to the members of the various advisory committees an opportunity to comment on that. I'm just sorry, LC McCray, I'm just trying
Sorry, and through the chair, I am not, I apologize, I didn't have so much to do with that, so I am not 100% certain as to what happened on the consultation process.
It's a,
sorry.
Respectfully, I don't know if it's your responsibility to explain that to me as a committee member, and if I may, through the chair, look to other members of staff who may or may not be here to speak to it. Thank you. But I really appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there GM Zagaric?
Through the chair, Mike Zagaric, General Manager, Finance Corporate Services. If the motion is approved, we can include that content in the historical content of the report in terms of what transpired as it relates to the amendment to the Code of Conduct.
So, Councillor Wilson, is that any other questions?
Okay, thank you through the chair. If I may then, if I have the permission of the mover to just if they could read the motion again so I understand it. I was hoping I would have the information that would inform my vote on this. But it sounds like, and I don't want to be problematic. It sounds like that overview will be offered to this standing committee following the motion, and I was kind of hoping I would have that to inform my decision on the motion, but if that's the way it is, that's fine.
Okay. Elsie McCray.
So through the chair, I've just received an email that questions were answered on the code of conduct during the training sessions. So that's one thing, and then I can read out what I have for your motion, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because it was a bit quick.
Thank you.
That staff be directed to consult with the advisory committees on the code of conduct and report back to the Audit Finance Administration Committee with their feedback and recommendations.
That's almost exactly it, yeah. So, and I guess maybe this is perhaps a very minor distinction, but like at and to advisory committees themselves get their feedback. That's the idea. So is that clear? Like, I'm not saying like email them individually. I mean like go to the advisory committee, have a conversation with them and get their feedback, bring that feedback in a report here before the thing is implemented. And as far as I understand from the delegate, that's the piece that's missing, is going, hearing feedback, and then getting that feedback in a report, and then bringing that in a report here before the Code of Conduct is implemented, so that this body and council can consider the feedback of advisory committees in their decision formally.
Councillor Wilson, question?
Thank you, Chair Wang. So I thought I heard from LC McCray that consultation took place. So I'm just looking for confirmation. And secondly, if in passing this motion, my apologies, but are we pausing the existing code of conduct, or what will be in place during this period of consultation through the chair?
Okay. I'm not sure how to direct that.
If I may, through the chair.
Sure. Yes. Yes.
As a staff liaison to one of the committees, but also to the Director of Government Relations who oversees many committees, I think perhaps what Councillor Crouch is speaking to and that type of consultation, to my knowledge, has not occurred. Okay. That there has been a representative perhaps from the clerk's office or corporate services that has attended each advisory committee meeting to do that consultation. And perhaps just referring to Deanna's presentation as well, the original language or communication that went out did reference in-person trainings, and the virtual option, from what I understand, became available after the original communication went out. So unless I have that incorrect, to my knowledge, that's what occurred. The in-person option was made available first, right, and then the virtual became an option afterwards, which Deanna spoke to as well. But the consultation of actually having a staff member present outside of the staff liaison to do that consultation with each individual advisory committee, I believe has not occurred.
Okay, through the chair, that's really helpful. I will be supporting the motion as a consequence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So back to Elsie McRae. Can you read out that motion again, and then we'll go forward with that?
Sure. That through the chair, that staff be directed to attend each advisory committee during one of their regular meetings to consult with them on the code of conduct and report back to the Audit, Finance and Administration Committee with their feedback and recommendations.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Maureen Wilson. And so let's go to a vote.
Can I speak to it?
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, Councillor.
Sorry, that's the procedural awkwardness. Sorry. Just want to say that just slightly want to make sure that the words at the end are there before its implementation. Because there's currently a code of conduct right now that exists, that's in practice and in use. We're talking about the new code of conduct. And yeah, I just want to briefly clarify, and sorry, until we had a seconder, I couldn't speak to this, so it was kind of awkward. I apologize. But I think this is a really important step. As the former chair of an advisory committee, I can tell you that the experience I had there with the members there was very difficult in terms of trying to get feedback heard at the formal, I guess I'll put it this way. We're told that the only business that a committee can conduct is in person at our advisory committees. Like, that's when we exist as a speaking body. That's when we're permitted to give feedback as an advisory committee. Is only really when we're in those sessions where we're actually formed and actively meeting. And so it's not impossible, I would say, for the committee to provide its feedback in a meaningful way unless we're in that setting. And so I really do think it's important that that step take place where we see committees having a chance to provide feedback, that feedback being summarized, and us having a chance to consider it before a code of conduct is implemented. I would say, in brief and in passing, without getting too much into it, there's a big difference, huge difference between the code of conduct that exists now and the one that will be implemented. And I think that everyone on advisory committees should have the opportunity to consider that difference, to make comments on that difference, to provide feedback about things they're concerned about. Because we are in some places, from my reading, holding members of advisory committees to a higher standard than we're holding ourselves. And I think we have to think about that before it's implemented. And I know many people in advisory committees have made these comments already. And the nature of a lot of the training has been, I will just say, didactic, or questions, this and that and the other. But it itself is not a feedback mechanism. It's designed for a training purpose and a learning purpose. And so we need a feedback purpose, and one that meets people where they're at and respects the time they have. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Crutch. I recognize Councillor Beattie.
That's better. Thank you, Chair Wang, and through you, just a question, I think maybe a follow-up. I think I heard Councillor Wilson ask the question in terms of the current trajectory and if the consultation process offers a period of delay, what happens in the meantime in terms of the current code of conduct, the future code of conduct? I'm wondering if there's someone that may be able to enlighten us in terms of the process should we continue down this road. Thank you.
City Manager Smith.
Good morning, and through the chair. The existing code of conduct would continue into place. The consultation, and we'll take our time and do it well, can come back with recommendations, and this council can amend the current code of conduct once they get those recommendations. That's not a problem at all.
Thank you. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you. So then I would be in support of allowing for this consultation to take place.
Councillor Tonnison.
Councillor Beattie basically just asked the question I had, and thank you for City Manager for weighing in.
Okay, thank you all. Are there any other questions, comments? No. So I think we're okay to go to a vote then, Elsie McCrae? And that vote carries 6-0. I'll pass it back to Councillor Crutch again.
Thanks also, Chair, Councillor Wang. I really appreciate your labor here today. We're going to move to item 10 now, as we approved earlier, instead of item 9, to address items 10.1, 10.2, and 10.3 in case the delegate is required in any way to respond to or answer any questions about that. 10.1 discussion item, the Citizen Committee Report. Women and Gender Equity Advisory Committee, developing an immediate winter housing strategy. That is, this procedurally wouldn't be necessarily approved at AFNA, as my understanding, and there are kind of a couple of options here in terms of procedurally what we can do. So I want to read those options out, and then I will kind of just make a little eye game. I'll look at everybody and kind of assess where our feelings are, so I'll read them out slowly. We can refer this to the Healthy and Safe Community staff for report back to Emergency and Community Services, because that would be the place where they could maybe have a fulsome discussion. We could just straight up refer this report to the Emergency Community Services Committee. That's option 2. So option 1 is refer to the staff for a report back to ENCS. Option 2 is just refer this report to ENCS. Or number 3, we can just receive the report and no further action is taken. So I'm going to just kind of go again one more time, and I'm going to watch everyone real carefully. So you nod where you feel a flavor. This might be a way of doing this. Number 1 is the report can be referred to Healthy and Safe Community staff for their report back to ENCS. Sorry, did you have a question you wanted to ask? Oh, number 1. Okay, number 1. I see a couple of people who are feeling number 1. Anybody feeling another number? Number 2, Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'm just trying to understand the process that this would normally follow and how the options being given today would align with normal process. Thank you.
So, through the chair, Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee has several advisory committees that report to it, Women and Gender Equity Advisory Committee being one of them. And so any motions that they make would have to come through AFNA. So as AFNA doesn't typically deal with these issues, procedurally, we would either refer it to staff to report back to ENCS, because that would be the committee that would normally deal with this, or you could just refer the report itself to ENCS, and then it would be on a future ENCS agenda. There is also staff here from Healthy and Safe Communities that could answer questions as well, should you wish to ask further questions on that.
Thank you, Elsie McCrae. And then back to the chair, if you could just once again highlight the 3 options then that you've provided.
Well, I'm happy to. Number 1 is that this report from the Women and Gender Equity Advisory Committee would go to Healthy and Safe Community staff, and then they would report on it at the Emergency and Community Services Committee. That's option 1. Option 2 is this committee could just zap the report right over there to ENCS, without asking for a staff report. Option 3 is we could receive it and take no action. So I see some eyeballs on option 1, a lot of ones. Okay. All right, I'm going to ask for a mover. Sorry, Councillor Wilson. Is there anyone else who wants to speak to the item? I apologize. I didn't even look at the who wants to speak thing. Councillor Alex Wilson, then Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Just a question. I mean, I think regardless, we're not like developing an immediate winter strategy. I'm just reading the word immediate there. I'm thinking about what our schedule looks like. I'm thinking that the next we have emergency community services today, and then I think the next one is in January. I bring that up, and maybe the chair could explain the difference between option 1 and 2 in terms of timing or in terms of potentially which meeting that goes to, because I do think that influences my decision.
Would Legislative Coordinator McCrae do the timing thing?
So, sure. So if you refer it to staff, staff will have a look at the report back to ENCS. I don't know what their timeline is, but staff in attendance, that would be a better question for them. They would report directly back to ENCS, whereas if you refer it to ENCS, my imagination would be on the January 19th agenda, and then at that point you might want more information from staff anyway. So it's not for me to decide, but those are kind of the different things that you could do.
Just to clarify, is there any way we can refer it to the meeting this afternoon? Is that a real thing?
We're at the will of committee. I'm not certain that staff are prepared in attendance to answer the questions today, but we are at the will of committee.
My understanding from that answer is that while we have some flexibility, it is likely that either way it is coming to January 19th, and so I would support the staff report, given that I think it's possible, even if we could give directive maybe for a staff report by the 19th, if that's possible, just so we're not moving the meeting. But with that in mind, it seems like that's where it's going anyway, regardless, and so having more information sounds great.
Councillor Wilson, I'll give you a chance to respond unless you're okay with that, and Councillor Alex Wilson can then move this motion. To you, Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if it's a distinction without a difference or a difference without a distinction, but it kind of goes back to the question that I asked the presenter of, is this the most appropriate standing committee for that particular advisory committee? I just think respectfully, there are considerations and deliberations going on and that will go on at emergency community services that maybe this committee has no knowledge of. And I don't have that capacity right now to consider the appropriateness of a staff report because there could be reports that could inform that. So personally, as a member of this standing committee, I don't feel it's appropriate for us to ask for a staff report on it. I would just refer, my preference would be to refer this advisory committee report to that, and that committee have that responsibility to consider it within the context and content of their deliberations and the reports that they will be deliberating through their sitting. Thank you. So option 2 would be my preference.
Could I suggest then, if I understand everything correctly, I'm going to do a suggest, and then hopefully you'll move. What I understand here is we could refer this report to today's Emergency and Community Services Committee, and what could happen would be then they could ask for, then a staff report could be asked for there to come back in time for January. That's my understanding. So if we refer it to ENCS today, then decision about what happens to it can be made today later, considering the word immediate is there. Does someone want to move that and someone want to second that? Moved by Councillor Alex Wilson. Seconded by Councillor
I would like
Wang.
more discussion, please.
Sure, no problem. That's coming right next. So moved by Councillor Alex Wilson, seconded by Councillor Huang. Are there anyone who'd like to speak to the motion? Councillor Beattie, Gava, and then Councillor Taddison.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. And basically, the comment that I would offer is that this isn't particularly orthodox, but given the timeline that I think we're trying to meet, I would support this, but I just want to highlight that this would be not the norm in how we would conduct ourselves as a committee, just in terms of giving proper process and letting things align where they're supposed to align. But I am supportive of sending it to this afternoon's meeting.
Councillor Taddison.
Can you just tell me what the difference is in the outcome if we supported choice 2 from choice 1?
I'll do my best to reflect the comments made by other speakers in summarizing this. So Councillor Wilson's concern, if I understand correctly, was that this body ought not to be making recommendations about staff reports at other bodies. So number one, that would be the impact that would be had, is that we'd be asking staff in another committee to report on something. We ought not to be doing that. We could, but we ought not to be, as Councillor Wilson's concern. People gave the kind of nod when we said that. And so sending this to ENCS is literally just like a here, right? And then that means if we do that now and today, there's an opportunity at that committee, and some of us will be on that committee, we'll be able to say, hey, could you bring a staff report in time for January 19th? If we don't do it today, then it gets put to the 19th, and then possibly we're waiting till February or some other time. And so it seems like the most expeditious way to do it is to be slightly unorthodox, if that summarizes the options.
So as I process this, is option 2 the way to get this moved the quickest? That's what my original support was then.
So I don't see any other speakers on the motion.
My apologies. I just got an email from Clerk Holland. Committee can't send it to this afternoon as council has to ratify the decision of AFNA at council, which is December 7th. So it can go to ENCS, but it won't be till January 19th.
Thanks. I see Councillor Alex Wilson.
Can we do what we were hoping to do at ENCS today at that council meeting, and therefore so refer this directly to that council meeting, and then at that council meeting where the members of the whole council as well as emergency community services can then request the staff report. So we're respecting the concern about this not being the correct body to ask for a staff report, but also respecting that we are trying to request a staff report before a month has elapsed, is I think like what we're really thinking about. So with that in mind, is council maybe the right place to send that?
Through the chair, committee can refer reports to council. Absolutely. They could. They can also refer it to Healthy and Safe Community staff for a report back to Emergency and Community Services. We do refer reports to staff for reports to other committees, but if committee would rather refer it to council, we can do that.
Okay. So.
Councillor Alex Wilson.
So we've been hearing the word procedure a lot. I think it's really important to understand that I don't think we have, like we do sometimes have standard procedures. I think particularly with staff resources in mind and respecting staff, it's so important that we follow those procedures. I think a lot of this other stuff is convention that we put on ourselves and we can take it off just as easily. So my motion is that with respect for what Councillor Wilson, my colleague, said earlier about the appropriateness of referring to staff from a different community, I think we're all on the same page that we wanted this to move forward. We're just procedurally lost. I've heard that it's possible to refer to Healthy and Safe Community staff, so I will move that, and I'm seeking a seconder to move this referral. So refer this to Healthy Safe Communities and request a staff report is the motion I'm putting forward. Yes.
I'm going to reread that motion out just to assist. Oh, I'm so sorry. There's another speaker. I apologize. Councillor Taddison.
Sorry, can we get a seconder before?
Yeah, we need a seconder first for Councillor Wilson's motion. Councillor Beattie has seconded it. Speakers on the floor. The first speaker is Councillor Taddison.
Okay, so procedurally, I apologize for this, but I'm trying to understand, didn't we just have 2 motions and now we're doing more motions with your new motion?
I rescinded my original.
Okay, so my goal, and dumb it down for me, please, is to make this happen as soon as possible. So if that's what does it, and everyone's in agreement with that, can I get a comment from city staff that that's what's going to happen? Or
Yes, can someone city staff just confirm that that's possible? What we're doing is possible to occur. The motion is possible.
Through the chair, I do rely on clerks because I haven't memorized the procedural bylaw. And just a general comment, one of the reasons why these processes are in place is so that members of the public know when certain reports are going where, because it's of a thing of interest to them, then they may only watch certain committee agendas or watch. And so that's why there's so many processes around it. So it's really for members of the public to know what's going where so they can follow issues that are of interest to them. You know, one of the challenges I think for this year is because it was an election year, so we didn't meet in the fall, so there was delays with this one. So, I mean, we do have a staff person here who works in housing, who would typically be at emergency and community services, who can answer general questions, because I'm assuming they are working on a whole strategy for the winter season already, and it may even be on the report agenda later this afternoon. Oh, he's online. And so, you know, some of it may get answered already at this afternoon's meeting, but I don't think there's a problem with a motion sending it to ECS at all, because that's the right committee where they would take this recommendation in looking at the whole scope of what that committee does. And if you want a short report to accompany it, I don't think that's a problem as well. But if I can also add on, this is a bit of a challenge when, even if we have this committee report to ECS, and that the committee may decide that's the best place to go. We had another committee made a change. The next recommendations related to the LRT. So then that would need to be referred to the planning committee. And so I'm looking at the time commitment of our chairs to have to attend so many different meetings. But the committee is very thoughtful, and they're looking at key issues for the city. But I don't know a way to not to prevent things going to the right committee.
Hopefully that answers your question. In the interest of time, because we have an hour and 45 minutes before the time gods get to us, might we proceed with motion number one, which was option number one, with Councillor Alex Wilson, if there's a seconder, which I think was Councillor Beattie. Is that okay? Is everyone okay with that? And
just to confirm, so this is a motion requesting a staff report from Health and Safety Communities and referring this report to Emergency and Community Services, January's meeting. Both of those things for the January meeting. Thank you. Yep. And we have a seconder. Perfect. Thank you so much.
eScribe will ask you a question momentarily. I appreciate everyone's indulgence with that. I know that these procedural things can be nestful, labyrinthine, and sometimes even stressful, but I think it's important for us to have these conversations because a lot of these things aren't necessarily clear. So thanks so much. We're on to item 10.2. Another Citizen Committee report.
Sorry.
Apologies. I lied. We're not on to 10.2. We have to carry the motion first. And that motion carries 5-1. We're on to 10.2, and we're going to be in a similar situation now for everyone. Citizen Committee report from the Women and Gender Equity Advisory Committee about inclusionary zoning along the LRT corridor. And the recommendation here procedurally, if somebody wants to move it, is this report can be referred to planning staff for a report back to the planning or LRT subcommittee. So I'm looking to council, to the committee here today, to an option there as to where we think this should go. I see speakers in one moment. I'm going to go on the internet. I see Councillor Huang.
Given that this is another procedural thing, is the LRT subcommittee, has it been struck? Like, could we feasibly push this report straight to the LRT subcommittee rather than planning?
to Legislative Coordinator McCrae or to anyone who might know the answer? General Manager Thorne, who knows?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, Jason Thorne, General Manager of Planning and Economic Development. So the LRT subcommittee does exist. You have not yet appointed your members. That will be coming soon, but it does exist. And certainly we have been updating that subcommittee over the past number of months on this initiative. So if the committee wishes to refer it there, we can certainly speak to it. I don't think a first meeting date has been set. But I'm anticipating sometime maybe late January, early February is when that committee will be meeting.
Yes, so if that's the case, I'd really like to put a motion forward that this next report be sent directly to the LRT subcommittee for whenever they are struck and whenever they are able to meet.
Do I have a seconder for that? I see Councillor Alex Wilson as seconding that. Thank you, and we will see. Oh, I'm so sorry. Are there speakers on that? And I apologize. There are speakers. Councillor Taddison. Fair enough. We'll now see the vote in e-scribe.
So my apologies. Just for clarification, Councillor Wang, you're wanting to refer the report to the LRT subcommittee, not for staff to report to it. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be sure. And it was moved by yourself, seconded by? Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, trying to catch up.
Okay, that motion carries 6-0. Thank you. We're on to 10.3, which is a citizen committee report, the Women and Gender Equity Advisory Committee, with respect to updated terms of reference. And so I need a mover and seconder to put this item on the floor. I see a movement from Councillor Huang. Is there a secondment? Thank you, Councillor Taddison. And are there any speakers on this? And just so you know that if required, the chair of the committee is here. If there are questions from the committee for the chair on this item, if there are no speakers, we can vote. I will look to the list of speakers now. I don't see, oh, I do see, are there? No, there are no speakers on this item. Just one more glance over, no questions. Okay, so could I have a vote then on approving the recommendations? That vote is up now. That vote carries 6-0. We're on to 10.4. 10.4 is the 2022 External Audit Services one-year contract extension report FCS 22068A, and that's citywide. May I please have a mover and a seconder to put item 10.4 on the floor? I'm moved by Councillor Alex Wilson, seconded by Councillor Beattie. Are there any speakers on this item? Seeing no speakers, can I have a motion to approve the report recommendations? In e-scribe, it shall appear. Oh, I'm so sorry. Councillor Taddison, I apologize. Can we cancel that? No? Oh, you were seconding. I'm so sorry. We already had a seconder. Okay, sorry. Okay, now it's back up. And that motion carries 7-0. We have had Councillor Clark join us. Just want to flag that in case anybody wonders how the numbers magically changed there. Item 10.5 is next, the 2023 Enrichment Fund, CEF, Advance Payments. This is report GRA 22004, and that's citywide. And may I please have a mover and a seconder to put this item on the floor? I see a movement from Councillor Alex Wilson. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Jeff Beattie. There's a discussion. Okay, I see on the discussion list for this, I see Councillor Huang.
Since the CEF closed in November, I'd just like to understand the timing of why these advance payments have come forward. Were these already pre-approved from previous years? I think I'll direct that to Director Stahl, I think.
To Director Stahl, you're here. Yep.
Yeah, happy to answer that through the chair to Councillor Wang. When Council approved the launch of the City Enrichment Fund in 2015 and the transfer occurred from CPP, the previous program, there were a handful of organizations that were funded previously through boards and agencies, and those organizations directly receive funds through the City Enrichment Fund, and as they were funded previously under boards and agencies, we adopted that similar financial structure, perhaps. And so those 4 organizations are the Art Gallery of Hamilton, Theatre Aquarius, Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra, and the Brock Music Festival. And so they're on the advance payment schedule.
Thank you. That is all for me.
I don't see other speakers on the list for this, so we can go to the vote. And that motion carries 7-0, and I want just to take a moment here to do a brief time check so everyone knows we're approaching the noon hour, and this committee must wrap itself up legally by 2. I just want to say that there are about 7 or 8 more items here. Then we're back to consent items at number 9, and then we have the outstanding business list. If something doesn't happen in confidential and closed session, then we're to the adjournment. Just letting everyone know where we're headed. We're on to 10.6, an update to investigate potential matching funding opportunities. And this is report G, RA 22001A, and it's citywide. May I please have a mover and a seconder to put item 10.6 on the floor? I see first Councillor Alex Wilson and then Councillor Tammy Huang as the seconder. Is there any discussion on this item? I don't see any discussion being indicated. We'll go to the vote to receive the recommendations. And that vote carries. And we're on to item 10.7. 10.7 is the Indigenous Advisory Committee 2023 budget request. It's report HSC 22058, and this is also a citywide report. Can I please have a mover and a seconder to put this item on the floor? I see a mover in Councillor Alex Wilson and seconded Councillor Tammy Huang. Is there any discussion on this item? I have checked the places. I don't see any discussion. We will vote to approve the recommendations. And that motion carries. And now we'll keep counting. And now we're on to motion 10.8, and this is an information technology cybersecurity program. This is report FCS 22088. This is citywide. And can I first have a mover and seconder to put this item on the floor?
Question, do I put my changes on now before?
We'll put it on the floor and then.
Oh, I see, okay, thanks.
I see a mover in Councillor Alex Wilson, the standard mover. Oh, Councillor Taddison got in there for a seconding. Very exciting. Change to the order. Mover and seconder. There is discussion on this item as Councillor Huang. First up, to as a housekeeping amendment to this item to add in subsection B. Councillor Huang, please read out your housekeeping amendment.
Thank you. That report FCS 22088 respecting information technology cybersecurity program be amended by adding subsection B as follows. B, that the General Manager, Finance and Corporate Services Department be authorized to negotiate, enter into, and execute any agreement and any ancillary documents required to give effect thereto with CIMA in a form satisfactory to the City Solicitor.
We need a seconder for Councillor Huang's amendment. Councillor Alex Wilson was first to second. And so that's a seconder. Is there any discussion on Councillor Huang's amendment? I'll look to the places, not seeing it. Could we have a motion, please, or sorry, an inscribe on the amendment? Okay. The original motion has been so amended, that carries, and we'll go back to the original motion, and mover and seconder have already placed that item here for approval. Is there any discussion on the original motion? I see Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize for my late arrival, medical treatment. Only one question, and I ask anytime there is a non-competitive bid proposal, can someone explain to me why we're not going to out for competition? That's the only question.
Through the chair, Mike Segarek, General Manager of Finance Corporate Services. I'll invite our Director of IT, Maria McChesney, just to explain the roster process. This is a firm on the city's roster, and so I'll invite Maria to speak to that.
Through the chair, Maria McChesney, Director of Information Technology. Councillor, to answer your question, the RFP for our roster did go out for competitive process. So the vendors that are on our roster were secured through a competitive process. We have already engaged one of the vendors on our roster to start to deliver on some of the management action plans that were in the cybersecurity audit that Charles Brown referenced earlier. And it's to our advantage to maintain that relationship with that vendor because of the learnings that they've developed with respect to our environment.
Thank you for the answer, Director McChesney. And I don't see any further speakers on our list, so we will turn to the vote. Thank you. Pardon me, the vote as amended. I apologize. Thank you. And that carries. We're on to item 10.9. 10.9 is the City Auditor reporting of serious matters to Council, case number 58061, taxi scripts. And this is related to report AUD 22009, and that's a citywide report. May I please have a mover and a seconder? I see a movement from Councillor Alex Wilson. Can I have a seconder to put this on the floor? Councillor Taddison, thank you so much. Is there any discussion on this item? I'm going to just quickly check. I see that our first speaker is Councillor Alex Wilson.
I have no real comments or questions, but just for the public listening, I think that it's really important to note that this is a significant report. No questions about it, but just we're moving quick and just want to acknowledge that this is significant for folks following along and would recommend everyone look at this.
And Councillor Maureen Wilson, did you have any comment? I saw a movement. No, nothing. Councillor Clark.
Can we ask the city auditor if he's present to make a brief comment on this?
If the city auditor is present, yeah, for a brief comment, that would be great.
Through you, Chair. Yes, this is an example. Earlier I mentioned the serious matters of doing a proactive disclosure. So it's important to realize that we're at the early stages of this allegation. This was reported to our office in September and alleging abuse with taxi scripts. It was reported by transit to Hamilton Police Services. So given that was already reported, our presumption is that Hamilton Police, they would undertake the investigation side, but given the circumstances, we decided to do a mini review or mini audit of potential weaknesses that might give credence to the allegations in terms of being able to exploit weaknesses in our processes and abuse the purpose of the taxi script program. So we did a very quick review of controls, and we, as a result of that, we made 3 recommendations to improve matters immediately. And it's much, I think, the Chair, is the question you had earlier. You know, when we have these situations, we obviously need to be expedient to protect the city and the taxpayers' dollars. So we made those recommendations with that intent. And so far as I know, they've Transit, they can speak to what they've done, but they've made a number of changes to the program and requirements. And I think we've drawn attention to, by making this public, I want to say too, we're trying to be transparent with this issue with the public as well. Knowing that it's an investigation in early stages, with a view to informing the public that this is potentially going on, but also if any members of the public have any knowledge of this, we would hope that they would come forward and report this to us through our fraud and waste hotline.
Thank you. Back to you, Councillor Clark.
Thank you to the auditor.
Cool. I just want to flag that the auditor was saying, hey, the public, pay attention. If the public has any questions about this or concerns, to bring those forward. I just wanted to flag that because the word public was used just a lot. Back to the original motion to receive this report. That will now appear in eScribe as I don't see any further speakers. And that motion carries. And I'll move on to 10.10. And that is for 1770 Fiddler's Green Road in Ancaster, the water account credit adjustment. And this is specifically related to report FCS 22086. And the impacts are in Ward 12. May I please have a mover and a seconder to put item 10.10 on the floor? Moved by Councillor Beattie, seconded by Councillor Huang. Is there any discussion on the item? I'm just going to double check over here. I don't see discussion on the item, so we'll move to a vote to approve the recommendations, which will appear electronically for you. And with excitement, that also carried. We've been saying this a lot, so I'm trying to inject as much excitement as I can. 10.11 is the next item, and we're getting close to this list, everyone. It's in-house bid for utility billing contact center services request a proposal, an RFP. And this is specifically related to report FCS 21082C, and it is citywide. May I please have a mover and seconder to put item 10.11 on the floor? I see a mover in Councillor Huang. Do I see a seconder in anyone else? Councillor Beattie has seconded this. Do I have any discussion on this item? Councillor Clark, I see.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. I'm supportive of the in-house bid process. Want to make it clear to the public, how do we firewall that process so that the in-house bid is not given any further advantage than anyone else?
Thank you for that question. I see. Who would like to answer that? Anyone from staff? Oh, thank you so much, Director McMillan. We'll answer your question in just a moment.
So through the chair, we've established a couple different teams. Well, there's one team that's going to be working on a review of the actual proposals that'll come back when we do the actual RFP for the contact center, and then we have another set of team that is going to be exclusively preparing the in-house bid.
And we're making sure that there's a firewall between those two teams.
And General Manager Zagarek is going to take that one.
Through the chair, the short answer is yes, there will be ethical walls between the teams. We have done this in the past with respect to the waste collection in-house bids, and so we'll follow a similar process.
I want to make it clear, Chair, that I'm not impugning any wrongdoing with staff. I'm just simply wanting to make sure that the public knows that we are aware of that potential and we have it covered. Thank you.
Thanks. I don't see any other speakers on this one, so we can move to the vote. Sure. We're just going to take a second as the machinery does a little dance. We will wait. Okay, that motion carries. Thank you so much. And now we're on to item 10 point, you know what, honestly, let me just make sure. 10.12, yep. 10.12, policy number 11, credit and debit payment processing. And this is related to report FCS 22063. And this is citywide. Can I please have a mover and a seconder to put item 10.12 on the floor? Simultaneously, I'm going to take a mover to be Councillor Beattie and seconded by Councillor Alex Wilson. Is there a discussion on item 10.12? I do see a first speaker of Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'm just looking for clarification. The recommendations seem to indicate both going to a competitive procurement process and entering into a contract with a particular service provider. So I'm just confused or perhaps seeking clarification on terminology. And forgive me if I'm just green. You can highlight that as well.
I will not highlight that, but I will turn to, now I'm seeing General Manager Zagaric has lit the microphone up, so we'll respond.
So through the chair, I'll invite Director Mercanti to just very quickly take committee through the analysis and rationale that really speaks to a commitment, yes, to a competitive bid process. However, the lead time required for the city to be in a position to go out to a competitive bid process.
Through the chair, Cindy Mercanti, Director of Customer Service, POA and Financial Integration. As Mike mentioned, we will be going out for an RFP for a payment processing provider in 2023. That is going to take a little bit of time to not only develop the requirements, but also issue it out to market, deal with any vendor questions, the assessment of the RFP, the award, the contract review. So that's going to take some time, and the time required is identified on page 4 of 5 of the report. And then if we go with a new payment process provider, then that's going to require some transition. So from an IT perspective, there's a number of things that we're going to have to do on the back end. As well, there's some additional things that we're going to have to do from an equipment perspective, because we have about 240 pieces of equipment. So what we're asking for is to stay within our current contract with our payment provider for 3 years. That will allow us to go through the RFP process and help us gear up for a transition to a potential new payment provider.
Back to you, Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. A follow-up question would be as to the frequency of our RFP process on payment service providers. Meaning, how frequently do we tender this?
Through the chair, we would be looking at a 5-year term for the next RFP term.
Thank you, Chair.
I am not seeing others registered to speak on this item, so we will go to the electronic vote on item 10.12. Received a feeling that eScribe is being slightly impertinent, as we know it to be at times. So we will just get a verbal confirmation from legislative coordinators when the motion is carried. Impertinence resolved. It's carried. So we're on to item 10.13, 2023 temporary borrowing and interim tax levy bylaws, report FCS 22080. This is citywide. Can I have a mover and a seconder to put the item on the floor? Councillor Huang has so moved. Will someone so second? Thank you, Councillor Beattie. Is there any discussion on this particular item? I'll check the places. I see no discussion. We can have the electronic vote to approve 10.13. The recommendations there in. And that carries. Getting close to the end here. Now we're at 10.14, capital project closing report as of June 30th, 2022. And this is report FCS 22079, citywide. Can I have a mover and seconder to put this report on the floor? I think, Councillor Maureen Wilson moved it and seconded by Councillor Taddison. Is there discussion on this item? Don't see anyone indicating that they want to talk about it, so we'll put this up to approve the recommendations in eScribe. That is carried, and we're at 10.15. And briefly to let you know, there's a bit about a confidential bit here. I'll get to that in a second. But first, it's capital projects status report as of June 30th, FCS 22089, also citywide. Can I have a mover and seconder to put this item on the floor? Councillor Huang, a seconder to put the item on the floor. The item is unfloored. Councillor Taddison is a seconder. The item is now on the floor. Is there discussion on this item in the open session? Not seeing anyone wanting to discuss it. There is a confidential bit to this in Appendix C. So does anybody want to go into a closed session to discuss the confidential materials in Appendix C? If we'd have to defer part of this, if that was the case, and if not, we can approve the motion now. I'm not seeing a desire for having a closed session chat about it, so we won't. And off we go now to eScribe to approve the motion. And the last item in is coming up. That carries. Now we're at the last item in section 10, the tax and rate operating budget's variance report as of August 31st, 2022. Budget control policy transfers, and this is related to report FCS 22042A, and that has citywide impacts. May I please have a mover and a seconder to put this on the floor? I see it moved by Councillor Maureen Wilson and seconded by Councillor Huang to put this on the floor. Is there any discussion on this item from anyone here today? I'm not seeing anything in WebEx. I'm not seeing any hands starting up. So can we have this in eScribe for a vote? And that carries, and I'll need just about a shake here to get back to section 9, the consent items. Thank you. Section 9 it is, and we're into consent items now. 9.1 in consent items is a 2022 third quarter emergency and non-competitive procurements report. That is report FCS 22046B. That is citywide. Can I have somebody please move and second that we receive the consent item? I see that by Councillor Huang, seconded by Councillor Alex Wilson. Are there any questions of staff about this report? I'm not seeing any, so we'll require an electronic vote to receive this consent item. We're on to 9, oh, no we're not. Now we're on to 9.2 because that just carried. And 9.2 is the 2022 third quarter non-compliance with the procurement policy report. That's report FCS 22047B, and that is citywide. May I please have a mover and seconder to receive item 9.2? Moved by Councillor Huang, seconded by Councillor Beattie. Are there any questions of staff on this report? Not seeing any, so I'll have an electronic vote to receive the report. And that is carried. There are 2 items left in this section. We'll move to 9.3. It's a 2022 third quarter request for tenders and proposals report. That's report FCS 22048B, and that's citywide as well. Can I have a mover and seconder to receive this item? Moved by Councillor Alex Wilson, seconded by Councillor Taddison. Are there any questions on this report for our staff? I'm not seeing any questions, so we will vote. In the last section, that's carried. And the last item in section 9, so 9.4, is the Hamilton Future Fund Governance Review and Reserve Strategy Update. And that is report FCS 22045A. That's also got citywide impacts. Can I have a mover and seconder to receive item 9.4? I see Councillor Alex Wilson to have moved that and seconded by Councillor Huang. Are there any questions of staff about this report? And I recognize right away Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. If I could ask through you for the available staff to just give a public overview in this, a little bit of background and the update, please, and thank you.
So through the chair, Brian McMullen, Director of Financial Planning, Administration and Policy in the Corporate Services Department. Yeah, the intention of this report is to give a bit of an update from recent meetings back in September, Hamilton Future Fund Board of Governors, and then our General Issues Committee, September 21st, and then Council on September 28th. So at that time, we'd put a preliminary timeline in front of first the governance review, then the Board of Governors, and then this report is just giving an indication on that, on the timing and when some of this work is now going to be done. So the review, Hamilton Future Fund Governance Review and Reserve Strategy, just for the general public, was required and coming out of an audit that was performed by Charles Brown and his audit team back in 2021. And as a result of that, we were asked to review the governance structure and the reserve strategy. So we proceeded with that work and come forward with a number of reports. And now we're getting into some of the delegations with the public or engagement, and we did some engagement with the Hamilton Future Fund Board of Governors. At one of the particular meetings where there was asked for a bit of an update on the framework that we were going forward with and some of the information that we want to clarify with the public on the purpose of those 2 reserve funds. So there's 2 reserve funds, Hamilton Future Fund Reserve A and Reserve B, and it was questioned about the strategy related to those reserves and how those reserves are going to be used into the future. So that's the work that we're partaking in the next few months. So just to be clear, the public engagement was going to take place in September and October 2022. Now it's going to be in the first quarter of 2023, and then we'll come back with a governance review subcommittee report in the second quarter of 2023.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you. I'm not sure it's within the purview of this report, so through the chair, it was my understanding that there was a recommendation from council that went to the Board of Governors in September or October with respect to affordable housing, and I'm wondering how that was received and whether there was a change in that recommendation, please, and thank you through the chair.
Yes, so through the chair, yeah, we have identified in the report, page 4 of the report, that the initial uses of the reserve were initially municipal infrastructure and asset management, investments in affordable housing, and that was then changed to non-profit or not-for-profit affordable housing. And then some of the other focus areas are limited investments in strategic priorities and supplemental funding for city enrichment fund. For those are some of the potential purposes of the Hamilton Future Fund reserves. So the change was that we added in the not-for-profit affordable housing into that original reserve focus area.
Thank you. I appreciate that and look forward to the public engagement in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maureen Wilson. I don't see any further speakers in our queue, and so we could go to the vote on item 9.4. And that carries. And we're on to section 11, but if I recall correctly, Councillor Clark was going to move this motion to the January 19th meeting. But if you want to do it now, because you're here, we can deal with it now. Okay, we shall deal with it now. So on to Zone 11 of the agenda, motions. That's motion 11.1, the development charge, demolition charge, credit extension for 708 Rymel Road East in Hamilton, Ontario. And Councillor Clark has so moved this. Do we have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Beattie is a seconder. As the mover, Councillor Clark, if you'd like to motivate the motion, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, for the latitude. I sincerely appreciate it. It should be known that I'm sponsoring this motion for Councillor Esther Pauls. Whereas on August 12, 2022, Council authorized staff to issue a demolition permit for 708 Rymel Road East, Hamilton, pursuant to Section 33 of the Planning Act as amended without having to comply with the conditions of subsection 6.A of the Demolition Control Area Bylaw 22-101. Whereas the city development charge demolition credit expires 5 years from the date of issuance of the demolition permit, and whereas the development of the applicant's lands cannot proceed until servicing is available, which is dependent on the timing of adjacent lands, which is outside of the control of the applicant. Whereas the education of the development charges are not within the municipal authority, and therefore education development charge demolition credits cannot be extended by council. Therefore, be it resolved that staff be authorized to extend the city development charge demolition credit at 708 Rymel Road East, such that it expires 5 years after all the downstream servicing, storm, sanitary sewers, water mains, with the Cedrina Gardens development connecting to the existing services on Turney Boulevard, have been constructed and operational to the satisfaction of the city. Specifically, the 5-year limit would commence at the time of the acceptance of the services by the city in accordance with the subdivision agreement for Sandrina Gardens, and B, that any foregone city development charge revenue related to the extension of the city's development charge demolition credits at 708 Rymel Road East, Hamilton, estimated at $58,500 as of September 18th, 2022, be funded through the Waterworks Capital Reserve 108015, the Sanitary Sewer Reserve 108005, the Storm Sewer Reserve 108010, and the unallocated capital reserve of 108020 at $5,564, $11,046, $12,212, and $29,678 respectively. And I was advised that Mr. Zagarek could probably answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Did you have any comments you wanted to make in support of the motion?
No, it's just that they're in a situation where the building, as far as I understand, needs to be torn down, but the rules that enable it is a little bit convoluted in that they're not going to have services for quite some time. So leaving the building or forcing them to build in 2 years after the demolition seems counterintuitive given that they won't have services by then. So that's the basic premise of it. Did I capture that?
Yeah. Through the chair, Councillor Clark's correct. This particular property owner could not proceed with redevelopment of the land because the servicing is not provided or adequate, and for that reason, staff are recommending that the motion references that when the servicing is put in place, then the demolition credit would expire 5 years after such date, which is which aligns with our current development charge credit policy.
Thank you. I think that's it from Councillor Clark for right now. I see 2 more speakers on our list. I see Councillor Maureen Wilson and Councillor Beattie. Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you. Through the chair, I recognize that Councillor Clark is sponsoring the motion, so I think my questions are going to be just to staff, if I could. I'm trying to discern what is in the what public interest is being served in this motion. I recall that there was approval. It references it in the motion at Planning Committee in August for moving ahead with a demolition in advance of the typical, what is usually done. And I remember seconding that motion because it just made reference to the site being perhaps vandalism or something typically is what referenced. The person purchased the property knowing that it wasn't going to be serviced, and I'm wondering what public interest is being served by this motion.
Thank you, and maybe that question could be directed to General Manager Thorne. Thank you.
Yes, thank you through the chair. And I'll preface by saying I think we're going to see this kind of situation a little bit more in the future, where we have properties in greenfield areas that are slated for urban development but that aren't yet serviced and ready to proceed to urban development.
And therein lies my concern.
And but where there's issues with vandalism or those sorts of things, where the landowner wants to do the demolition, but frankly where lands are approved for development but not yet serviced, it's not like we would actually want the site to proceed with just another single detached home consistent with whatever the existing zoning permissions are. So the desire would be to actually have the site redeveloped comprehensively as part of future development. And so I think we probably will see a bit more of this. Most of the situations we've seen in the past are more in an infill context, and there's certain provisions around the extension of demolition credits in those situations. But where we don't have the servicing available, the owner of this property wouldn't be able to proceed with redevelopment unless they were to build another detached home, which I don't think would be consistent with what the vision of the ultimate build out of that area would be.
Councillor Wilson, did you have a follow-up question?
I'm sorry to, just struggling with it a bit, in that we are providing public monies in order to advance a certain type of build versus a certain type of other, because there's not servicing. I'm sorry, I'm just struggling with what we're using public money here for.
So through the chair, I mean, ultimately it's before council to decide, but I mean, the alternative in these situations is that the property owner just leaves the home up, boarded up and vacant, and we're starting to see issues with that in a number of areas where homes are left up, and we're seeing vandalism. Members of planning committee will know that we're seeing fairly frequently motions coming forward to actually approve demolition of these homes prior to the building permit being in place for the replacement dwelling. That's what was the situation with this one. So, I mean, as I said, the alternative in a situation like this is the property owner just has to leave the home up and wait, and we are starting to see issues with that in many parts of the city.
And it should be clear, this is a motion, so you can make questions or comments in your 5 minutes. So I shouldn't have said it so pertly, the word question, but yes. Back to you, Councillor Wilson.
It is not rhetorical, but if we're going to be seeing more of these through the chair, did the purchaser not, obviously when the purchaser purchased this knowing that it was not going to be enjoying services, or did they have a schedule of servicing from the corporation in advance?
So through the chair, I apologize. I don't know who the purchaser was, or even if it was a purchaser. I don't have any information on the ownership of the unit.
No, beg your pardon. I'm not looking for the identification of the ownership. I'm trying to understand what was within the realm of the owner's knowledge in understanding when the parcel was to be serviced by the corporation. Was there a schedule?
So through the chair, I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I don't know the answer.
Councillor Wilson?
So through the chair, there was no promise of servicing or schedule of servicing of this particular parcel from the corporation when just trying to understand what our obligation was to, I don't want the identity of the landowner. I want to know what was the schedule of servicing that the owner anticipated when they purchased. Through the chair.
So through the chair, again, I don't have that information, and not knowing whether or not the applicant is a recent purchaser or a longtime owner, I don't know. If committee wishes, I could look into it and do a bit of a summary of the of servicing status on that site, but I don't know when the person acquired the property or what their expectations might have been.
If I might, Councillor Wilson. Oh, okay. The next speaker on our list is Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. My question is more of a journey of learning, so bear with me. I just want to understand the mechanics of this process. If I have it understood correctly, an existing home, presumed to be currently vacant, there's a plan from the owner to redevelop in the future. Services are not currently available to permit that to occur. The plan is to demolish the home now and collect the credit later, sometime between now and 5 years from now, if this were to pass. And then the alternative to that is demolish the home later and collect the credit at that time. But in the meantime, the house sits vacant in the interim. If I got that timeline correct through the chair?
Through the chair, yes.
I get a gold star for that one. Thank you.
Self-affirmed gold stars. The next speaker on our list is, I believe, Councillor Clark and then Councillor Tattison.
I'd be happy to yield to Councillor Tattison if you can put me back on at the end.
Do we have any timeline on when Rymal Road will be further development with enhancements, bringing the infrastructure necessary?
So through the chair, I'm sorry, I don't have that information in front of me.
Directly adjacent to this property, across the street, I should say, is a mall, a brand new mall. So how far is the development along there? Does that come off of Upper Sherman? Is that what's providing for the mall, the services? Or does it come in front down Rymal already? I'm trying to understand just what's the status of the services that are there now. It says it's not, but from my knowledge, it's very close.
Yes, and through the chair, I'm sorry, if council wishes to have information on kind of servicing status and servicing timing, and I'd have to take that back and have staff write something up.
At this point, I think that would be the best course of action, and I would make a motion to do that.
Okay, that will come at the end of the discussion if you'd like to make a motion to do so, to amend this motion so that it comes back. We can do another motion to refer it somewhere else, a motion to defer, and we'll get to that after speakers have been exhausted. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. So if I understand correctly, our demolition process, if you will, if a property owner is wanting to demolish a property, they have to build on the property within 2 years. Is that an accurate interpretation?
Through the chair, in terms of the chief building official utilizing their delegated authority to issue a demolition permit, yes, the chief building official requires a building permit to be in hand for the reconstruction. Where that's not the case, then that has to come before planning committee to authorize the demolition permit, which is what the case here would have been.
So the councillor was advised, as I understood it, to bring it to AF&A rather than planning. Was that good advice, or should this motion have been at planning?
No, through the chair, that's correct. So the motion for the demolition permit was at planning and was properly at planning, but matters related to demolition credits and DCs do come before AF&A.
Thank you. And so the challenge now is they can demolish the building, which is in bad state of repair. They got 2 years to develop it, but they can't develop in 2 years because there's no servicing there within that 2-year time frame, which is why this motion was drafted in the manner that it was. Do I have that understanding correct?
Through the chair, I believe that's correct, yes.
And I can share with my colleagues here on the table, I've got a few of these houses in my own ward that we're going to be in a similar boat. And the building is a mess. I mean, young people break into it. They do all kind of neat things inside. On the properties in my neighborhood, fires have been set, and I'm told that there's concern about safety. And so the challenge that we have as governors is, do we allow the building to stay standing, risking those issues and having other issues in the neighborhood with the building looking like the way it should not look? Or do we enable this motion to proceed so that the credits are put in place, and 5 years from now, if they haven't done it, then we can withdraw it, correct?
Through the chair, that would be correct. If they don't meet the timeline, it's actually not a question of council withdrawing, it would just expire.
Thank you. So I support the motion. Thank you.
If you could take the chair, Councillor Hoang, I'd appreciate it.
Go ahead, Councillor Crutch.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. See if I understand this at all. And I won't take a lot of time, but I just want 2 quick points. It's my understanding that what's happening here is that we're talking about the financial impact. We're not talking about the demolition impact necessarily. The financial impact is to the person who owns the property. And that person could choose to demolish this because they have a demolition permit, I'm assuming already, and could demolish this property today. The issue remains whether or not they can get a building permit again to rebuild after the demolition permit. But it appears that's at the purview of this body to continue to grant additional time and grant extensions to that 2-year timeline, so they could do that, but it would come at a cost. The second thing, to the person who owns the property. The second thing is that this would impact their ability to access a development charge credit because, again, of these timelines. And so that's also a cost to the person who owns the property, is the demolition, the development charge credit. Could you outline for me exactly how the cost portions of this work so I understand exactly what that's about here? Because really, if this is about, look, this person has to demolish it now, but then they have to pay a fee of X to do this thing later, and this is really about just deferring a fee to the person whose property it is. Like, I really want to be clear about that and what the actual cost to them will be.
GM Thorne.
Yeah, so through the chair, I can kind of speak to the process. I might turn to Mr. Zagaric in terms of the actual dollar figures involved. So demolition credits are something that are provided for in the development charges bylaw, and the basis being that, you know, if you're knocking down a building, there's services at that building today. So if you're utilizing those services, you don't pay a development charge because the services were already there, is the logic behind it. There's actually delegated authority to me to issue those extensions in certain cases where the reason the development charge extensions are typically for 5 years. There's a delegated authority to me to extend it in a very narrow set of circumstances, which is if there's been a delay in the approvals process beyond the developer's control. So that has been utilized a couple of times, really in, I would say, 2 situations. One being significant brownfields issues we see in the urban area that can take a number of years to remediate before they can develop, or if an application was appealed to the tribunal by a neighbor or someone like that has delayed things. So there's a narrow scope of delegated authority. Beyond that delegated authority, it comes to council. It comes to AF&A, and I would say there's one or two of these maybe per year with requests for further extensions for other reasons. So this would be in that category of seeking an extension through council for those other reasons, and I think the councillor has kind of summarized it well in terms of the alternative if you're a homeowner in this situation is in order to access that right of a demolition credit, you would have to leave the building standing right up until the point you're ready to redevelop. And I guess what I would say is that's not always in the best interest of the neighborhood to have those buildings standing. The reason it is in place is, as you can imagine, if this was an infill property which was serviced, ready to go, the person could pull the building permit and start construction immediately. You don't want to have the it's the missing tooth syndrome down a street of just one house sitting there vacant on a vacant lot. So the idea of having these credits expire is to sort of light a bit of fire under the feet of the person to make sure they actually do the redevelopment. But in a case like this, where development is a bit of a ways off, given the location and the servicing, as I said, the only options available to the property owner would be just leave it sitting there until the last minute so that you could then access your development charges credit. So I think in this case, what they're saying is the property is a problem. Leaving the house standing is a problem. That's why they sought the permission of committee to permit the demolition early. And this motion is now seeking to notwithstanding the fact that they sought the demolition early, to still be able to access that demolition credit.
So great, thank you. That was extraordinarily clear. Just want to make it really clear then. This property owner can demolish this property whenever they want to demolish the property. They wish not to demolish it without having a demolition credit. Is that correct?
They wish to demolish it so it's not a blight on the property, but in doing so, they don't want to give up their ability to access that demolition credit.
Yeah, so they can do it if they want to. Thank you. General Manager Zagarek, could you tell me exactly what the value of the demolition credit is?
And to GM Zagarek.
Yeah. So through the chair to the property owner, it's an extension of the development charge credit, which based on 2022 development charges represents approximately $58,000. The reference to the $58,000 is we need to fund projects, and so it's a transfer from a city reserve to, from one reserve to our development charge reserve. But to the property owner, there's no transfer of dollars. It is an extension of the development charge credit until such time as the servicing is in place.
Councillor Crutch.
And so that credit would be applied to any development charges that they had to pay. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct. Our experience is typically it's not like for like. There will be some development, potentially oversizing of the development, so the city would realize that development charges on the square footage beyond what was originally in place as it relates to the original facility.
Councillor Crutch.
Thank you, Mike. So I just have a comment. Thank you for those insightful answers. That really satisfies my understanding. And what we're doing here, from my perspective, after having heard that, is the city is choosing to subsidize in some way this $58,000. For someone who has bought a property, knowing the property wasn't serviced. I mean, it's obvious. Knowing this is the procedure, and is kind of saying, well, I don't want to demolish this unless I can retain this credit. So, I mean, that's the thing here that's in front of us, I think, and I just want to really make it clear that we're talking about a financial thing here and talking about who's going to pay for this, who's going to pay for the burden of the $58,000 on this property and to redevelop it. Thanks for your time and for your answers.
Back to you, Councillor Crutch, as chair.
Quick time check. It's 12:48. And I'm going to just apologize because I haven't been looking at WebEx. I think there are two more speakers in Councillor Alex Wilson as a first-time speaker and a second-time speaker in Councillor Beattie. So I'll hear from Councillor Alex Wilson.
Thank you, and I'll keep this very short. Just a quick comment. I think we're doing two things here. Thank you, Chair Crutch, for really helping us understand. The conversations, I think, has been focused on both the upstream impact and thinking about how this trend is playing out, as well as the specific motion as we're new councillors and we're learning process, and this is a helpful example. So On that note, just on the upstream conversation that's kind of come out, I think we should, as a council, as a committee, revisit that conversation, because I think it's about how we value property, how we allow properties to become vacant and blights. That is really the upstream issue here. And that's where I would like to kind of think my attention moving forward. And I just want to share that with other folks who've kind of maybe had some concerns about that. I think we can address that. That just might not happen right here, right now.
Thank you. I don't think you had any other comments or questions. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, and I do apologize, and I know that we are on a time crunch, and I feel like we're doing an anatomy lesson during the autopsy. There was something that GM Thorne, I think, may have said, and I just wanted to seek clarification through you, Chair. The credits are provided under what circumstances? Because I think I heard you say that they're provided where services already exist, and I'm wondering if you could clarify what leads to the issuance of these credits in the first place.
Yeah, so through the chair, the sort of the philosophy behind the credits was to acknowledge the fact that there was a home there before that was utilizing services, which is what the DCs would pay for. It's not an exact sort of type of service, but for example, where we have seen types of development that don't pay development charges, like a place of worship, for example, the credit would not extend because that use would never have paid development charges because it's an exempt use. So that's kind of the philosophy behind why that provision has been in the DC bylaw for quite some time.
Okay, so then perhaps, and I'm just going to ask this through the chair, the credits are provided because the services already exist, or some services already exist, yet the redevelopment of the property cannot proceed because the services don't exist. So I'm seeing the two ends meet in the middle, and I'm losing track of the connection, and I'm wondering if there's some clarification that could take place. And this is purely from my learning on how this all works. I would hope that this wouldn't prejudice the decision on this particular issue, but I am curious as to how the mechanics of this may work.
Yeah, so through the chair, and as I spoke to earlier, the services don't exist for a more dense redevelopment of the site, which is the site is inside the urban boundary. It's on Rymel Road. The desire would be that when it redevelops, it will redevelop as a more dense kind of mixed use type of development, which is what the vision is for the Rymel Road corridor. If they just put up another single detached house, they'd be able to do that. I don't know if this one is on, what type of service this is on, but I would say that if that were to happen, that would not be consistent with what the city's official plan vision is for what Rymel Road corridor will become. So hope that sort of helps explain the servicing issue.
Yes, thank you.
I'm not seeing further speakers on the subject, and so I know there was a flavor earlier. I heard the refer/defer flavor, as I wanted to consult to see if anybody wanted to refer or defer this, or if we wanted to go right to the vote. I'll kind of eyeball this. I don't see a refer/defer feeling. Cool, and we're going to go to the vote. That vote carries 6-1. We're now moving on to item 12, notices of motion. There are none, so we'll move right to item 13, general information or other business. So this is just where there's an amendment to the outstanding business list, and I'll read it out quickly. The amendment to the outstanding business list is to add item 13.1 and then sub-item 13.1A. This item needs to be removed because it's considered complete. It's just a fraud and waste annual report, AUD 21011, and that's a citywide item. I'm not going to read out all the little fine details there, but to suffice it to say that it's complete and needs to be removed. Can I have someone move and second to approve the amendments to the outstanding business list? I see a move from Councillor Huang and a second from Councillor Taddison. So do I see any discussion on removing this item from the outstanding business list? No hurried hands means to the vote we shall go. That motion carries. If you're feeling any excitement or anticipation, it's because we're at the point in the meeting when it may end. So section 14 is private and confidential. We don't have any private and confidential items today because we moved the motion earlier without wishing for discussion on that. So that passes by. And we are then at item 15 on the agenda, which is the adjournment. And can I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Huang was the fastest. Councillor Taddison was second fastest. Is there discussion on this motion, which doesn't need to be, but I'm just curious if there is? No. All those in favor, please electronically vote on our adjournment. We are so adjourned. Thank you. We did it, everyone. Congratulations.